Hey everybody, welcome. We're going to have yet another great late night chat today. Special holiday stream, special message and all of that. It's going to be really awesome as always. Glad that you all are here. So yeah, let's jump into it and go from there.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're having yet another great late night chat. So just a reminder, the way we do things is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, all you need to do is send me a question. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your question. You can also do Rumble rants. You can also do a super chat. We do take super chats now. However you want to send questions for the second half of the show. Now, a couple announcements. We are the Center for Political Innovation, and we are a movement dedicated to building anti-imperialism and fighting for a new America. So if you'd like to join us, we are having our national training workshop coming up in August 12th to 19th. It'll be people from around the country. You'll get to know our organization and what we're all about. Our national convention will be happening on the 15th. And during that national training workshop, we will be having a France out of Africa rally in Chicago on the 14th, the day before our convention. So if you'd like to get involved, go ahead and register. You can fill out the registration form. It's going to be a great experience. I got to tell you, we just had a very great CPI meeting this afternoon. I felt very energized. I figured we wouldn't have very many people because of the 4th of July, but we had a great crowd of folks. Oh, shout out to our friends from Due Dissidence. They're here. I'm very excited for our organization going forward and everything we've got going on. The Center for Political Innovation is an excellent group. And, I am really excited about all that we've already done as an organization and all that we are planning to do. Coming out of the 7-day training program, we're going to go into the fall, guns blazing, so to speak. No actual firearms, no violence, but, in a figurative sense, we'll be going all full speed ahead. It's going to be great. Yep, that's us. We are the Center for Political Innovation. I'm looking out my window. I'm seeing fireworks going off. That's nice, but watch me instead. Watch the Center for Political Innovation. If you'd like to become a member, we're doing great things. People are joining all the time. We're really doing some great stuff, and I'm very excited. So just a quick reminder, as I said before, we'll be following our usual format, which is first I give the opening remarks, which should be quite interesting tonight. I'll be talking about a number of things and tying them all together. After that, we do the roll call, and then I answer questions for the remainder of the night. So if you've got something to talk about in the second half of our show, all you need to do is go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin, or you can send a super chat. We're monetized again, or Rumble Rants, or however you want to send questions. But questions are what makes the second half of the show what it is. So yeah, tune in and enjoy. So happy 4th of July, everyone. I hope that you're all having a happy 4th of July. We wish you the best for the 4th of July. It is the 250-year anniversary of America. And at the same time, our president, Donald Trump, has decided to basically show how accurate this quote is. This is from a very important book by Karl Marx that people are less familiar with. He wrote, Hegel remarks somewhere that all the great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add, first time as tragedy, second time as farce. And that's really what's true about Donald Trump. Today, Donald Trump decided to go to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota and give a speech against communism for the 4th of July. This was our president, Donald Trump. And I must say, Donald Trump is a complete failure of a president. He promised no new wars, and he started a huge war. He said he was going to fix Biden inflation, and we have inflation now like you wouldn't believe. Our oil reserves are probably going to run out in August, and we'll see what inflation even more so looks like. His public opinion approval rating is in the toilet. Everyone who voted for Trump is mad at him for the most part. All the people who didn't vote for him hate his guts more than ever. He's failing as a president, but as a complete failure, he's figured that there's one thing he can go to. This is what he decided to make the nation aware of. And this was his July 4th message to America.
You can be loyal to Karl Marx, or you can be loyal to America. You can be a communist, or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. As for those who peddle Marxist lies about our heritage, who tell our children that we live on stolen land or that our heroes were oppressors, they're doing something much worse than slandering our past. They are slandering and attacking our future. Not going to let that happen. They're trying to tear down the great American character, to destroy the people who declared independence, who crossed the Delaware, who settled the West, and who conquered the skies. You know who those people are. But we will never let that happen. Our American ancestors did not shed their blood at Concord and Trenton, Gettysburg and Shiloh, Midway and Normandy, just so that a band of thieves, radicals, and lunatics could come in and loot, pillage our nation. Our heroes died to win, build, and to save, and to build truly a great country, the greatest country ever in the world.
Yep. If there's any children who are in school, if you ever forget your homework and the teacher says, where's your homework? Say, communism is just the most evil thing. It's the most horrible thing ever, right? If you ever are late to work, I recommend, and your boss is like, oh my God, why were you not here on time? Say, boss, communism is the worst thing ever. Don't we all hate communism? If you mess up, fall back on, don't we all hate communism? I mean, that's what Marx is doing. That's what Trump is doing. It's that he's completely failed as a president, but the American deep state is founded on the premise of anti-communism, right? The FBI was started in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution with J. Edgar Hoover going around giving speeches on the evils of communism. The CIA was started after the Second World War because the American government was really, really afraid of the expansion of the Eastern Bloc and communism all over the world. The American deep state is founded on anti-communism. And Donald Trump is crashing and burning as a president. He launched a war that he lost, and he's sinking in approval ratings as his vice president is trying to get credit for solving it. He's messed up the economy. He's doing miserably. And so he's just, communism bad, communism. Don't you all hate communism? Communism is really, really awful. But it's more than that. And we're going to get to that later tonight in the show. Because this quote about first time is tragedy, second time is farce really speaks to what's going on with Donald Trump's presidency right now. I believe very much this was an attempt to redo the Reagan Revolution of the 1980 presidential election, the early 1980s and late 70s. They tried to do that again, and it didn't work. And it's been a farce. It was a tragedy the first time, and it was a farce. And we'll be getting to that later. But first things first, I have been infuriated looking at social media over the last couple of days because I am watching one of the dumbest arguments I have ever seen about communism take place. Our whole nation is now having an argument about communism. It's not just because of what Trump said. It's because of the fact that the Democratic Socialists of America, they won the primaries in New York, and that it looks like at least one of the people who won, Darla, is actually an anti-imperialist to some degree or other. She opposed sending weapons to Ukraine. Apparently, she had an old Twitter account where she praised Mao and Stalin and stuff like that. It's interesting to me. It's not exactly clear where she currently stands on it, but she does oppose aid to Ukraine, which is good. And it appears that Darla Xavier, who's running for office in the Bronx and won the Democratic primary for Congress, it appears that she, at least in the past and maybe a little bit now, is some kind of actual anti-imperialist. She's 1 out of 3, but based on that, we're now having to have an argument about communism. And the argument about communism that we are watching is so dumb. It is beyond dumb. It is a manifestation of ignorance like I've never seen, because both sides agree on one thing. Communism is taxes. And that's what the argument is about. The Democrats believe that communism means that you tax rich people and use the taxes to give people social programs like healthcare and education. That's communism. And the Republicans also agree that communism is taxes, and they believe communism is when the government takes from wealthy people and redistributes their income, and that's communism. And so we're having an argument about, should we have more of a welfare state or less of a welfare state? And somehow we are pretending that this is an argument about what went on in the 20th century. And it is one of the dumbest things I have ever seen. The argument is, it's on the level of a 5-year-old on both sides. Okay. And, if you're on the left and you take offense to that, well, I don't care. And if you're on the right and you take offense to that, I don't care. There are people on the right that actually know what communism is and disagree with it and have sophisticated arguments against it. And there are people on the left who actually know what communism is and have sophisticated arguments for it. Those are not the voices that are dominating social media right now. We imagine 2 5-year-olds fighting. We've got one group of 5-year-olds who says some people have more money than others. That's no fair. And we have another group of 5-year-olds that says the government is taking away some of my money. That's no fair. And that is the level of the argument, right? Is it no fair when the government takes your money away, or is it no fair that some people have more money than others? And that is the level of the argument. And it is dumb. It is dumb and childish and stupid. And nobody is taking the time to learn anything. And what I have urged people to be very careful about, I've been saying on these streams for the past year or so, I've been saying no preaching without teaching, no teaching without preaching. There's a lot of social media content that is designed to never teach you anything, but to just reinforce your anger. If you are angry at Republicans, there's loads and loads of videos to just get you fired up at Republicans. If you are angry at Democrats, there are loads and loads of videos to just get you angry at Democrats. But the world is much more complicated than Democrats are bad or Republicans are bad. And if people are just pandering to your pre-existing prejudices, just reinforcing and making you feel justified in your rage and anger, they're not making the world a better place. And that I've written about the danger of an American years of lead. I've been warning. What I wrote was after the Luigi Mangione assassination. allegedly, when Luigi Mangione allegedly assassinated Brian Thompson, the CEO, and mainstream media celebrated it, and all the leftists were cheering for this murder of a corporate executive. And I wrote this pamphlet-length book warning about that as politically dangerous. And then the murder of Charlie Kirk happened. And after the murder of Charlie Kirk, everything I wrote in this book became more obviously true. And that the ruling elite are fighting among themselves. You can bet the ruling elite are fighting among themselves right now. It's the oldest fight in American politics, the Yankee and Cowboy War. The Eastern establishment, the ultra monopolies, want to stabilize capitalism with degrowth and Malthusianism. And the lower levels of capital, the military industrial complex, just wants to make money, and it resents any effort to restrict their profits. And there is a fight between the more effective evil, or the geostrategic evil, that has a plan for a low-wage police state to stabilize capitalism, and a strategic long-term vision of beating China, beating Russia, and securing the dominance of Western monopolistic corporations. And there's a lot of wealthy people who don't agree with that plan because it'll cut into their profits, and they just want to make money, and they don't care. And AI is leading to a long-term economic crisis. And that is what no one can acknowledge here. The computer revolution is a game changer that has changed the way the economy works. And the profit system, the irrational system of production for profit, cannot handle the computer revolution. Because human labor power is the source of all value and wealth, and human labor power is being eliminated from the assembly line, and the wages paid out are never enough to buy back what is produced. And we're heading toward a meltdown, an economic meltdown of irrational proportions, of astronomical proportions, based on the irrationality of the profit system. And, we're heading toward the Gotterdammerung of capitalism. We're heading towards capitalism's demise because of this built-in problem of production organized for profit. And that's what the ruling elite are all aware of. And there's not much we can do about it. And they're becoming more and more desperate. And because of that, they're becoming more and more desperate, and they're planning different ways to try and save their system with the destruction of productive forces. And they're inching toward World War III, an all-out war to reclaim the corners of the world that have broken out of their dominion, like China, like Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, like Cuba. And we're headed toward a capitalist crisis. And this is actually very much related to what Marx actually wrote about, which these people know nothing about, which is not showing up anywhere in the argument that is currently taking place. No one seems to know anything about what Karl Marx actually spent his life writing about. So tonight, we're going to talk about what communism actually is. We're going to go over it very, very quickly. We're going to go over why we at the Center for Political Innovation do not consider ourselves communists. We are in a new stage called innovationism, and why that is necessary, why it's necessary to move to this new stage. And we're going to talk about what to do about this. And then we're going to talk about what's going on with Donald Trump and why this is the Ronald Reagan revolution, tragedy as farce. We're going to talk about all of this. So buckle in. We're going to get into all of this. So first, we're going to talk about what communism actually is, which is not taxes. Okay. Taxes go on in any system. Every society that has ever existed, right, has levied taxes. The Roman Empire taxed people. Were they communist, right? The founding fathers of the United States, even though they fought a revolution against the British because they didn't want taxes, they still did impose taxes and built lighthouses. And taxes are a reality, okay? Taxes go on under every system. Every system has redistribution of wealth. I hate this phrase, redistribution of wealth, because redistribution of wealth goes on in every system that has ever existed. Right? The road outside your house, the paved road, was paid for with wealth that was redistributed from taxpayers, right? We redistribute money to corporations in terms of corporate contracts, corporate subsidies, the military spending, et cetera. We just redistribute money to low-income citizens with the food stamps program, which is largely a subsidy to agribusiness. They sell food they wouldn't sell otherwise. That redistribution of wealth goes on under every system that has ever existed. And so the idea that the argument about socialism or communism is how much redistribution of wealth should go on is completely bunk. And it completely obscures everything that Marx and Engels wrote about, and it doesn't get to the essence of what the issue is. So we're going to quickly go over what communism, what Marxism, Leninism actually is. We're going to go over the new stage that we're in called innovationism and why that's necessary. Then we're going to get back to Trump and why he's beating the podium about communism. We're going to talk about DSA and why they're doing what they're doing and what's going on here. So we'll start with this. All right. The word socialism has been around long before Karl Marx. In the 1800s, we started seeing feudalism being torn apart. In England, you had the English Civil War in 1649. That was kind of the overthrow of feudalism. In Britain. In France, you had the French Revolution of the 1790s. You had the American Revolution. And feudalism was being ripped up as an economic system. As feudalism was being ripped apart, you got many people that saw that the world that was being created from the overthrow of feudalism had a lot of problems. The hope was by overthrowing feudalism, we would create a society with liberty and justice for all, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in America, liberté, égalité, fraternity in France. The idea was we get rid of this system of feudalism that says some people are the natural superiors of others, where the king rules because he has hereditary right, where if you're born a peasant, you live your whole life as a peasant. If you're born a noble, you live your life as a noble. We're getting rid of that system. We're embracing trade. We're embracing people having money and spending their money, right? We're embracing commerce. We're embracing private property. And the idea was on the basis of private property, we'd create a society with freedom and justice for all. And it didn't happen, right? In the society based on private property that emerged, there were a lot of people that were suffering. And let me add that in order to create capitalism from feudalism, this was a process that went on over the course of hundreds of years, and it involved mass death and killing on a level that had never been seen before. And that's why when people start giving you this body count for communism, oh, communism killed a gamillion people. It's like, first of all, just to create capitalism from feudalism, it took a lot of killing. First of all, they had to take all the feudal commons and turn them into private property. And if you read about the clearing of the commons and the enclosure movement, where they kicked peasants off their land, and they said, no, you don't have a right to live here. A peasant is kind of a semi-slave, but they have the right to live on the land no matter what. When we kicked them off the land and said, no, you have to work, and if you can't pay your rent, you're homeless. That was a pretty brutal process. They started executing people for the crime of being homeless. Vagabonds were being executed because there were so many homeless people. During the reign of King Henry VIII, when he was kicking peasants off the land, so many people became homeless, they just started killing them all and exterminating them. And there was mass executions of homeless people. And then you had the Jacobite uprising in Scotland. And after the Scots failed to preserve feudalism with the Jacobite uprising, they cleared the Scottish Highlands. And that was a genocide where they kicked people off the land and they exterminated people in mass and they took kids away from their parents. And it was a brutal, brutal thing. And at the same time, they were colonizing the Americas and killing the Native Americans. And they were colonizing Africa, and they were taking African people and putting them on slave ships and taking them to America. And just to create private property, there would never have been capitalism in Europe. There wouldn't have been enough wealth. They wouldn't have had that mercantile class that laid the basis for private property. You wouldn't have had that without killing millions of people, first in Europe, and then in the Americas, and then in Africa, and in Asia, and all over the world. Capitalism began with mass genocide. And the people who have the wealth, the old money that rules the world, the people that are running the London Stock Exchange, the big monopolies and bankers, those folks, it has been in their family for generation after generation after generation. And they got it when feudalism was being ripped apart in Europe, and they got the land and they got the property, and their wealth came from one of the greatest episodes of mass theft and plunder in human history. What they call the rosy dawn of capitalism, the primitive accumulation, was one of the most murderous and bloody processes in history. So when they try to give you this, well, communism, you can't have communism because they just killed so many people. It's like capitalism, before it even got going, They had to kill millions and millions and millions of people just to get it going. So just throw that out. But out of the rise of capitalism, the promise was, we're going to bring down these kings, and we're going to give you freedom, and you're going to have rights, and it'll be a meritocracy. It was Napoleon who coined the term meritocracy out of the French Revolution. Napoleon came in and he said, I'm gonna march the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. And he said, we're gonna have a meritocracy where, you know, the best people just get ahead and all of that. Out of the promise of liberty, equalite, fraternity, liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we got a society that was very, very unjust, where people starved and were desperately poor, where you know, some people that had all the money had all the power. And on top of that, there was a problem that had never existed before in human history. And people started noticing this problem in the early 1800s. And in 1825, you had the first big economic meltdown that happened in 1825 in Europe. And we'd never experienced this before, because it was a crisis of poverty amid plenty, a crisis of overproduction. It was a 4-letter word, glut. People became homeless, not because there wasn't enough housing, but because there was too much housing. People starved on the streets, not because there wasn't enough food or there was a shortage of food, but because there was too much food. Poverty and desperation was created by abundance. And that had never happened before. That doesn't exist under any other system. As capitalism came into existence, it wasn't a fair society. Some people had the land and the money and the property, and everybody else didn't, and they had to rent themselves out to be hired by those who did own the land and the property. And on top of that, this problem existed that the more wealth they created, pretty soon people didn't have jobs. They talk about the coal miner's riddle. The little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because we can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the little boy says to his father, "Why can we not afford any coal to heat the stove?" He said, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I've been laid off." And he says, "Why did you get laid off? Why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He said, "Because there is too much coal." That never had existed before. That's called glut, overproduction, value crisis, where a whole bunch of wealth has been created, and as a result, people lose their jobs and are homeless. Poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty. And that's a completely irrational problem. Why should that exist? And the more technology advances, the bigger the problem gets. The more efficient it becomes to produce goods, the more you have this problem of the economy breaking down and falling apart. It's a really, really big problem that had never existed before. So in France, there was a guy named Henry Saint-Simon, and he was kind of a nice guy, and he did charity and helped poor people. And he started saying, well, liberalism, which is the ideology of the French Revolution, the celebration of individual rights, liberalism, which celebrates the individual, maybe that doesn't have all the answers. And so instead of liberalism that emphasizes the individual, maybe we should have socialism and think about all of society, not just the individual. Socialism comes from the word society. It was first used in French. Then later, there was a guy in Britain named Robert Owen. And he was a wealthy factory owner, but he saw how unfair the world was. And so he built a model city in New Lanark in Scotland, and eventually moved to Indiana and started a model city called New Harmony. And he called himself a socialist. And he said, we need to have a society where we don't have this problem of poverty amid plenty, where everyone, is in control of the means of production, where the economy is organized to serve people. And he tried to build kind of a model society in Indiana. And around the 1800s, in the early 1800s, leading up to the 1848 German Revolution, there were all kinds of people that were saying, well, we're socialists. What did that mean? It meant that they thought that the revolution to create capitalism had not brought a society of equality, and we needed some kind of new revolution to make sure there was economic justice. That's what socialism meant. It was a very vague concept. And there were some people that said we need to go back to feudalism, right? And that they wanted some kind of, Christian socialism, that, go back to feudalism. And there were some people that built model utopian communities all across America. There were little socialist cities that were created. In Akron, Ohio, near where I grew up, there was one called Zohr. All across New England, there's a lot of these little socialist cities that were built by, some of the founders of the United States that built little socialistic cities, and all kinds of people were talking about socialism. And at the same time, workers in factories were going on strike against their employers, and they'd get together and they'd say, we're not going to work unless you increase our wages. We're not going to work unless you agree to shorten our hours. And you had labor protests and strikes and the rise of labor unions. You had the Chartist movement in Britain of workers that were demanding a 12-hour workday. They wanted the parliament to pass a law for a 12-hour workday. So amid all of this, you have two guys, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and they emerge amid all of this. And Friedrich Engels is a very, very wealthy, rich kid who has a lot of time. And Karl Marx is a very, very skilled writer, a guy who edits a newspaper. And they become good friends. And they develop their own theory of what they call scientific socialism. It's different from this vague concept of maybe society should control the economy, maybe we shouldn't have poverty amid plenty. It's this new thing that they developed called scientific socialism. And it's based on dialectical and historical materialism, which is a theory that Karl Marx developed. And first of all, it's the idea that all that exists is matter. There is no God. There is nothing spiritual. Their feelings are just the product of the environment. You only have thoughts in your head because you have a piece of matter in your head called a brain. All that exists is matter, and thoughts and feelings are all just a reflection of matter. That's the first part. That's materialism. But matter is constantly clashing with itself and constantly in a state of conflict. And that's the dialectic. And it's through the contradiction, the conflict of matter that history moves forward. That's dialectical materialism. That's what Marx said. And it makes sense because at the time they were coming out of feudalism. And in feudalism, they said spirituality is all that matters. The king rules because he has divine right from God. It doesn't matter if you're suffering in this life because when you die, your soul will go to heaven or it will go to hell if you're bad. So be good. And there was a feeling that everything was justified in the name of spirituality. Everything was justified in the name of religion. And at the same time, there was a really, really big emphasis on only believing in religion and not trying to kind of give up your material needs, etc. That was a big thing. Plus, people were told not to struggle. If you were born as a peasant, you're going to be a peasant. If you were born as a landlord, you were born as a landlord. Well, the antithesis of the feudal way of thinking, of the feudal order, is dialectical materialism. Feudalism says everything is spiritual, everything is justified by religion. Dialectical materialism says there is no God. There is no God. All that exists is matter. Feudalism says there's no conflict, there's no struggle. We want all things in balance. All things should be in balance. Everyone has their place. Everyone just follows their place. Marx says struggle is what defines reality. Conflict and struggle defines the nature of the universe. And at the time, they had just come out of feudalism and the world was very, very unjust. And so they wanted to take the ideals of the revolutions against feudalism and expand them. It makes perfect sense that that's what they developed. And along with dialectical materialism, you get historical materialism, which is the idea that history is defined by the struggle to advance productive forces. That, first human beings develop a new technology. That new technology leads to the creation of a new social class, and that new social class then takes control of the government and creates a new form of government. First, you had hunter-gatherer civilization, but then there was a scarcity, and so we developed a new technology called farming and domesticating animals, growing crops. And out of that, a new class was created called landowners, and those landowners then set up something called the state, the government, to make sure that they owned the land, and that was the first revolution, the first social revolution. Eventually, out of slavery, you got the rise of feudalism, and out of feudalism had come capitalism, and that capitalism had created two classes: the proletariat, the wage worker, the men of no property, the wage workers, and the bourgeoisie, those who own, right? That the worker sells his labor power and is given wages in exchange. The capitalist owns, and he invests some of the wealth that he owns and turns it into more profit. And that they have a different relationship with money. The worker has to labor and get his money, and then he has money after he works, and then he has to go back and work and get more money. The capitalist owns for a living, and he owns and he turns the wealth he already has into more money by investing it and setting up factories and selling products and et cetera, and, turning a profit on the market. And that there are two different classes, the owning class and the working class, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And Marx notices that the proletariat is the overwhelming majority, and that capitalism is becoming more and more unstable because of this problem of overproduction, which is that capitalism, the more wealth that's produced, the poorer everyone gets. And I actually, this doesn't get understood enough. And I've shown this video on these streams so many times, but I have to show it again, because this is the most important thing that Karl Marx taught: the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the problem of overproduction. And nobody talks about this. None of these people on the internet that are in favor of socialism or against socialism have any idea about any of this, that capitalism can't handle technological advancement. It creates a problem, and this is why our global economy is breaking down. So I'm going to show the Socialist Math video, and this is why AI is leading to a global crisis, and this is why the ruling class are fighting. This is what it's all about, folks. So watch this.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. Do you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America, so I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I am going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right, if you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products, because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Yep. That's the issue. And that capitalism has this problem of poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance. And as technology increases, the economy becomes less and less stable, and economic crises become more and more frequent. And if you look at, the Great Depression, for example, that was because there was a huge leap in assembly line production. It became easier than ever to make cars and radios and refrigerators. And because of that, there was a huge economic crisis, that the more efficient technology becomes, the more impoverished society gets, and we have an economic crisis. And that the only way that can be resolved, Marx argues, was that the proletariat, the wage workers, have to take control of the government. And, right now the government is run by the people who have the most money, the capitalists. Well, the wage workers have got to get together, and they've got to overthrow them, and they've got to take control of the government and have the dictatorship of the proletariat. Or Marx said they have to win the battle for democracy. They have to defeat the people with all the money, and they have to take control of the government themselves, and then centralize the means of production, organize the economy rationally so that profits are no longer in command. And this problem of poverty amid plenty and technological advancement leading to poverty is gotten rid of. And then on that basis, society can become even wealthier. When we get a situation where technological advancement doesn't lead to people getting poorer, the amount of wealth in society can greatly increase. And on the basis of that, you can build up the wealth of society, and you can build a society of vast abundance. And it'll get to the point that there's so much wealth that exists that people just do what they feel like doing and take what they need, each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. The ultimate goal is a world of so much wealth and abundance that there's no coercion, there's no crime, there's really no need for a government. Technology has advanced so much, and there's so much abundance created by that technology, and we can all just live happy, comfortable lives because the robots are doing everything, and we don't have to work, and there's so much wealth and abundance for everybody, we can all be happy. That's the Marxist vision, okay? And Marx tried to set up an organization in his lifetime called the International Working Men's Association that tried to advance these ideas. And he fought with anarchists, and he fought with other people. Marx was a huge supporter of Abraham Lincoln. He was the New York Tribune, which was the Republican Party newspaper that was supporting Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, hired Karl Marx as their London correspondent. Marx organized mass rallies to support Abraham Lincoln. He called the U.S. Civil War the Second American Revolution. There was a brigadier general in the Union Army named August Willich, who was a German-born guy who was a follower of Karl Marx. There was a Marxist division of the Union Army called the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment. It was led by Joseph Wedemeyer. Marx was a big advocate of abolishing slavery. He said, labor in white skin cannot be free as long as labor in black skin is branded. Marx built the International Working Men's Association, but it kind of fell apart. And his ideas, his pamphlets, and his books on socialism were widely studied, and he came up with an understanding of socialism, this concept of scientific socialism, that became the most popular. And basically what it was his understanding was that socialism needs to attach itself to the labor movement. As workers are forming unions and organizing against their employers, we need to turn the labor movement from simply being an economic struggle of factory workers versus employers. We need to turn it into a political struggle, a struggle to take control of the government. We need the labor movement to become a political movement. That's what Marxism sought to do. And at the time that Marx was getting really, really old, some people in Germany came together and they formed something called the German Social Democratic Labor Party. And eventually, after Marx died, the German Social Democratic Labor Party set up a network of political parties all over Europe, and they were called the Socialist International, or the Second International. And they decided they didn't want to call themselves communists because communism was associated with violence and revolution. So they took on the name Social Democracy for their movement. And it was a movement for the worker to seize control of the factory, for the worker to seize control of the government and organize the economy rationally. That's Marxism. But that was, in about 1900, 1910, Marxism, or social democracy, or the Second International, was widespread all over Europe. But then you had what was called the crisis of Marxism, because it didn't happen, right? Marx had predicted that as technology increased, the economy would become more and more unstable, and the worker would increasingly get poorer and poorer and poorer because there's not room for him at the assembly line. And capitalism would become more and more unstable, and eventually the workers would rise up and take control of the government. And that wasn't happening in 1900. In 1900, 1902, 1903, everybody noticed that Marxism was everywhere. The German Social Democratic Party was probably the biggest political party in the world at that time. There were Marxist labor unions. The Labor Party was formed in Britain. There were German, French Socialist Party, and the socialism was everywhere, all over the world, including in America. It was quite popular as well. There was a best-selling science fiction novel called Looking Backward that was about a socialist United States. Eugene Debs became quite popular running for president. Socialism was everywhere, but you weren't having any revolution. And these socialist groups were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they passed reforms. Some of these countries, they passed the 12-hour workday. They created universal male suffrage so that everyone could vote. But no revolution was happening. And actually, capitalism was becoming more stable. So what was going on? What was happening? Well, Vladimir Lenin came along, and he had an explanation for what they called the crisis of Marxism. And the crisis, he said, is that capitalism has entered a new stage called imperialism. This is something that a lot of people who call themselves communists or Marxists don't understand. And this is like, again, I don't call myself a communist. I call myself an innovationist. But I understand, and we in CPI understand this stuff on a far deeper level. How many of these internet people who call themselves Marxists could tell you anything about the tendency of the falling rate of profit? None of them. How many of them even know what overproduction is? None of them, right? Well, we understand that. Well, imperialism, capitalism entering the stage of imperialism. That's another thing that a lot of these people don't understand. They say, well, Lenin said that capitalism means they have to invade countries and have wars. That's not what he said. Lenin said we're not living in regular capitalism anymore. We're living in a new stage of monopolistic capitalism called imperialism, where all the big companies are basically becoming subsidiaries of banks, finance, but the rise of finance capital, where bankers are dominant over industrialists, right? There's people that still to this day say that every time I say the word banker, I'm being anti-Semitic. That means code for Jew. Well, a guy of Jewish descent named Vladimir Lenin wrote a whole book about how bankers became dominant over industrialists in the 1890s, and that was the basis for capitalism entering a new stage. He called imperialism the rise of an international financial oligarchy, where big corporations centered in the Western countries started spreading their tentacles all over the world. And the understanding was that in previous times, you might have a tire company in America, and they sold tires in America, and then they exported tires all over the world. And, you might have a steel company in Britain, and, they sell steel in Britain, but then they also export steel all over the world. That's not how it is anymore. Instead of exporting products, they had the export of capital, the export of the corporation. instead of the company just selling steel around the world, the steel company set up shop in other countries, right? The export of capital, right? The expansion of corporations all over the world. And they started seizing parts of the third world as their captive market. Territorial partition, where they seized chunks of Africa, they seized chunks of Asia and South America, and they took control and they said, this is our property. You have to buy your products from us. We're going to take your oil. We're going to take your rubber. We're going to take your coal and your timber, and we're going to take it back to our country and turn it into a product, and you have to buy it from us. The seizure of raw materials from the third world, the expansion of monopolistic corporations all over the world, the export of capital, right? That's what capitalism had become. And it led to a period of stability in the Western countries. The Western countries weren't having economic crises every time you turned around because so much money was coming in from all over the world that you had a layer of bankers in the West that were making super profits. They weren't just making profits from selling products. They were making super profits by dominating the world market and acting as a monopoly. And countries around the world were kept in chronic poverty. They weren't even being able to develop capitalism. They were kept in semi-feudal conditions where, they didn't have electricity and they didn't have running water and they didn't have schools and they didn't have their own industries and they didn't have their own factories and their own products. And they were kept in semi-feudal conditions as captive markets for the big monopolies. And they were subjected to super exploitation. They weren't just exploited like a worker who sells his labor to a capitalist, but they're subjected to super exploitation. Right? Super profits for the imperialists, super exploitation. And in the Western countries, the working class divided, and some of the workers got privileges. And because they were starting to get privileges, they didn't become revolutionary. And Lenin noticed that in all the Western countries, in Britain, the Labour Party, it spoke as if it was a revolutionary organization, but in reality, it was just part of maintaining capitalism. And in Germany, the Social Democratic Party looked like a revolutionary party, but a lot of what it was doing was just stabilizing capitalism. And the German Social Democrats had organized and demanded the creation of kindergartens, right? Education for kids, kindergarten, public education. Well, the German Kaiser said, okay, and they turned it into a place that kids got military training and learned to march. And the Social Democrats demanded national health care. And so the German Kaiser created a national health care system that was tied in with the German military. It was part of how the German military functioned. And that a lot of the reforms that Social Democrats were fighting for were not leading to a revolution. They were actually making the imperialist countries stronger and dividing the working class, getting special privileges for some of the workers, and making the imperialist countries more stable so they could dominate the world. And Lenin comes out with this whole new theory, basically saying that capitalism is not what Marx had written about. It wasn't what Marx had written about. We're in this completely new stage. And in this new stage, the revolution is not going to be workers on the factory floor fighting against their employer. That's not where the revolution is going to come from. It's rather going to be people in the third world, colonized people fighting for national liberation, right? That these countries that are kept chronically poor, the only way they're going to be able to electrify and raise themselves up from poverty and build schools and highways and not be kept in chronic poverty, they're going to have to kick out the imperialists. And so it's going to be the struggle of the colonized people, the struggle of oppressed nations for national liberation that is going to bring socialism into the world. That's Lenin's whole new theory. And that's not Marxism. That's a whole new innovation, right? And he understood what was happening in Europe. And then the climax was World War I. All these socialist groups, all the Labour Party in Britain, the German Social Democratic Party, they all said, we'll never support a war. World War I broke out. They, done changed our minds. Yeah, we'll support the war. And millions of people went off to die in World War I. 20 million people died. And at the time, the Western colonizers, they were saying, we're civilized. We're civilized. That's why we're colonizing Africa. That's why we're the civilized white people. These are savages. But World War I was one of the most brutal displays of human savagery ever seen in human history. Poison gas, aerial bombing, widespread use of machine guns. The Battle of the Somme, you had 20,000 people killed within a couple hours. It was just one of the most barbaric and horrendous wars ever. And during that war, Lenin declared that the socialist movement of Europe was a stinking corpse. And he said, we need to build a completely new movement, and not a movement that is involved with the socialist groups, but a movement that is against them. We need to go lower and deeper to the real masses, and we need to build a completely new movement. And in Russia, Lenin was able to take power on the basis of opposing the war. All the other parties, the Tsar had been brought down, the society was in a crisis. All the other parties wanted to fight in World War I. And Lenin was the only major political force that said, we're going to stop fighting in World War I. And they seized power in the Soviet Union. And they created a new government, the Soviet Union. And Leninism also emphasized the question of the state. They said, we're not trying to get elected in the capitalist government. We're trying to create a whole new government. And Leninism, Marxism, Leninism, was a new stage that was a complete change. It was about the struggle of the colonized people against the imperialists. It was celebrating the nationalism of the oppressed. And after the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks sponsored the Baku Conference in Azerbaijan, the Congress of the Peoples of the East. And they said, anyone who's fighting the British Empire will give you support. And the Emir of Afghanistan, who was a conservative monarchist, he was fighting the British. They said, here's some guns, here's some weapons, fight the British. And the Egyptians, the Egyptian merchants, capitalists, private owners, they were fighting the British Empire. And they said, we support you. And at the time in Britain, a lot of the political leaders, like the Labour Party, were calling themselves socialists. And they said, who cares? If you're supporting imperialism, we don't support you. If you are in favor of imperialism, we're not on your side. And if even if you're a socialist, doesn't matter. And if you're fighting the imperialists, but you're not a socialist, you're a monarchist, you're a merchant, we don't care. We support you. Leninism, Marxism, Leninism is about opposing imperialism. And so many of the people out there nowadays don't understand this. They really don't understand this at all, right? That, again, it's funny because, I don't even call myself a Marxist-Leninist anymore. We're innovationists. We're a new stage. But none of the people out there that call themselves Marxist-Leninists understand what imperialism is. They think imperialism is a policy. When a country invades another country, that's imperialism. Wrong. Imperialism is a system. It is a system. And that is the basis for the entire movement. It was fighting that system of imperialism, not fighting to make pure communism, And he said Lenin's whole thesis was we need to defeat imperialism. So just like none of these communists out there understand the tendency of the falling rate of profit and overproduction, none of these communists understand Lenin's theory of imperialism, right? None of these people get this. None of these people get this. And I will tell you why. None of them get this because they are attracted to the aesthetic of communism, which is a problem. We're going to get to that. But what happened? Well, as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution, you had a wave of anti-colonial revolutions that happened. And on the African continent, you had Gaddafi, who was an Islamic socialist. In Cuba, you had Fidel Castro, who was a communist, right? You had Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq and Syria. You had the Chinese Revolution. The Communist Party of China took power and created, China. And all over the world, you had a wave of anti-colonial revolutions that took place. None of that would have been possible without the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union, a big chunk of the world, 1/5 of the planet, broke out of imperialism. And as a result of that, it gave rise to all kinds of things. All kinds of things happened because of the Soviet Union. And this is, again, what I find to be, a point that we can't make enough. As much as we have entered a new stage as innovationists, if you are an American working class person, you benefited overwhelmingly from the Soviet Union. For example, if there's anyone in your family who's a steel worker, if there's anyone in your family who's a meat packer, anyone in your family who's an auto worker, anyone in your family who is a public employee, a government employee, the living standard that you have came from communism. Because if you go back to the 1930s, people who worked in steel mills made about what fast food workers make now, made less than $15 an hour, adjusted for inflation. You go back to the steel mills, you go back to the auto plants, you go back to all of that, all of those workers and what used to be those good paying jobs. They used to talk about those good paying jobs. They weren't good paying jobs. And the people who worked in those conditions, it was largely immigrants from Ireland, from Italy, from Eastern Europe, they got paid poverty wages. And then the Great Depression happened, and many of them lost their jobs, and there was mass unemployment. And as a result of that, the Communist Party of the United States, that was funded and backed and supported by the Soviet Union, organized the industrial unions. They organized the auto workers, the Flint sit-down strike. They organized the United Steelworkers. They organized the meat packers of Chicago and the stock houses of Chicago. They organized textile workers, low-wage workers, and they won union contracts where it was negotiated in a union contract how much they would get paid. And they won the right to a union contract. And Roosevelt created Social Security in 1937. Unemployment insurance. If you ever collected unemployment insurance, that comes from the Soviet Union. And after World War II, when the U.S. economy rebooted, when you had a boom in the United States, the post-World War II economic expansion, the wages of American workers went very, very high and got very, very high. And it was because of those industrial unions. It was because of the communists that they created that. Also, yes, the civil rights movement, right? That black people in America have been fighting for their rights since the moment they were brought here. You had the slave revolt of Nat Turner. You had the slave revolts that took place, and John Brown and the abolitionist movement. But the real boost for the black liberation movement came in 1954 when Emmett Till was brutally lynched, and his body was mutilated. And the Soviet Union took the image of his dead body and they sent it all over the world. And they said, America says it believes in democracy and freedom. Look what they do to black people. And it was in the context of the Soviet Union supporting Kwame Nkrumah, the African socialist leader who was opposing U.S. imperialism. It was in the context of the Soviet Union backing the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And it was in the context of the Soviet Union championing black people at the United Nations when they brought William L. Patterson to the United Nations to give a speech called We Charge Genocide and condemn racism in the United States and use the United Nations as a platform to condemn racism. It was in that context that the modern civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King emerged. So if you are an American, you can thank Stalin. Yes, Joseph Stalin for the civil rights movement. You can thank Stalin for Social Security. You can thank Stalin for the wages of steel workers and auto workers, the wages of teachers, the wages of public employees, the wages of meat packers. All of that comes from the Soviet Union. None of that would have happened. And the world that we live in today, even though communism is not very much of a factor, I mean, it's kind of a factor, but it's not a factor as it once was. Soviet ideology really no longer exists. The world as we know it today is a result of what happened with the Soviet Union. There would be no BRICS if it wasn't for the Soviet Union. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union that gave guns to Mao Zedong and organized and enabled Mao and China to break free and build themselves up, China would still be the sick man of Asia, one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, China is the second largest economy in the world. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union, India would still be a British colony. Now, India never had a socialist revolution, but they had a nationalist revolution. And it was because they were afraid that India would have a full communist revolution. And India gaining its independence after the Second World War was largely a result of the context of the Soviet Union expanding, etc. And all across the African continent, all across South America, the BRICS world that we understand, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, none of that would exist if it wasn't for the Soviet Union, if it wasn't for communism. South Africa, Nelson Mandela was a member of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party. And the Soviet Union gave millions and millions and millions of dollars to the struggle to defeat apartheid in South Africa. And if you go to Southern Africa, all of those governments were started by communists. South Africa, Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, Mozambique, Namibia with the Southwest African People's Organization, and Zimbabwe with the ZANU-PF, the Zimbabwe African National Union. All of that came from communism, right? And so the world that we live in is largely shaped by communism. And nobody knows any of this, right? Again, we're having an argument. The reason, and this is the thing. In America, if you talk about communism in America, it immediately turns into a conversation about making everyone equal. And that's really what's behind this dumb argument that we're having on social media right now, right? Is that redistribution of wealth, making everyone equal, right? Conservatives think communism is taxing you and giving money to lazy people who don't work because they're trying to make everyone equal. And leftists think communism is taxing the rich people and giving people free healthcare and stuff because it's about making everyone equal. It's not about making everyone equal. It's about liberating the means of production from the problem of poverty amid plenty. It's about countries no longer being kept poor by the domination of big banks and monopoly. And it's about imperialism, this system of monopolistic capitalism that is keeping the world poor and grinding us into poverty, this system that cannot handle the problem of artificial intelligence, that is leading to a huge economic meltdown because there's no room for us at the assembly line any longer. And because human labor power is not necessary in production and machines can do almost anything nowadays, their system is having a meltdown. And communism was intended and started out as a movement to break countries out of that system. And it turned the Soviet Union into a superpower. It turned China into the second largest economy in the world. Communism as a movement had its successes, but we have entered a new stage. We've entered a new stage. Why are we innovationists and not communists? Because, look, if you're still doing the Marxism-Leninism thing, you're missing everything we learned in the 20th century. We've learned a lot since the 20th century. We're innovationists. The first thing that we've learned is that dialectical materialism is destructive. If you believe that there is no God, there is no spirituality, all that exists is matter, you're not going to do very well, because the spiritual aspect of mankind is very, very important. And in fact, communists largely do appeal to people's spirituality, their desire to fight for what is right, their desire to work against their own economic interests and struggle for what's right. And in fact, many people have noted that communism resembles early Christianity. Right? It's, give your life to the struggle. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. Leave behind it all and struggle and give your life for the movement. Right? That it resembles early Christianity. Communism, the majority of the people on the internet right now that are attracted to communism, they are attracted to the red flag, they're attracted to the hammer and sickle, and they're attracted to the aesthetic of rebellion. That's what they're attracted to. Most of them don't support or admire Stalin. Most of them don't support China, modern China, even though it's a huge government led by a communist party. Most of them don't know shit about any of these countries. Very few of them even support any existing socialist country. They just love tear it down and burn it down and revenge and rage. And it's based on resentment, right? Some people have more money than me and I want to cut all their heads off and it's no fair. I went to a DSA meeting years ago when they had a DSA here in Brooklyn. I saw people wearing guillotine necklaces, right? The dialectical materialist philosophy that says there is no God, there's no spirituality, but that all reality is defined by conflict is very dangerous. And it's based on appealing to people's Oedipal desires, their desire to kill their parents, to rebel, right? Which is a basic human impulse that we all have, but it's basically unleashing people's desire to kill their parents and cut off the head of the king. No one can tell me what to do, mom and dad. It's this teenage rebellion, as well as people's desire for libidinal release. Violence and sex are mixed together, right? And they are, right? Red, the color red. What is red the color of? Blood. Red is the color of blood. Red is the color of sex. And red is the color of anger, right? And if you wave red in front of a bull, a bull full of testosterone, it charges at you. And that communism, because it's tainted by the struggle against feudalism, it comes out of the struggle to defeat feudalism. It very, very much, right? It's dialectical materialism. There is no God. There is no God. It's all about conflict and struggle. And so we want to make people rebel against their parents and overthrow governments and cut people's heads off. And we also, at the same time, we want to get all our rage and anger out. It's all about sex. It's all about violence. It's all about killing and revenge. Get all your rage and anger out. You can't build a healthy movement on the basis of libidinal and Oedipal impulses and dialectical materialism. And they have learned that. They've learned that. In China, they had something called the Cultural Revolution, and it was a disaster. And it was Mao telling teenagers to go out and tear down society, tear down their parents, tear down the teachers, take revenge on people, punish people whose parents had a privileged role in the old society. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. And that if you look at the communist governments that currently exist, they don't promote conflict as the way to move history forward. They actually do the opposite. They promote oneness and unity. And they are increasingly spiritual. The leader of the Russian Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, is a Christian. He's a Russian Orthodox Christian. And he says Jesus was the first communist. Nicolas Maduro, who's sitting in a prison here in Brooklyn, the communist leader of Venezuela, who was kidnapped, he says that Jesus was the first communist, and he is a Roman Catholic. And if you read the statements that he's written from jail, they're very, very Christian, right? And that communist governments don't promote dialectical materialism largely. In China, they kind of do, but not really. They promote their own thing. And at the same time, they're not appealing people to be full of rage and rebellion. And in fact, the libidinal and Oedipal impulse that people have is largely hijacked by imperialism. George Soros is using that, right? George Soros is using those dialectical and Oedipal and libidinal impulses to destabilize countries. When the USA doesn't like a country, they pump the social media bots full of rage and anger. Aren't you angry at the government has so much power? And look at the corruption. You know, they got the Panama Papers. Oh, look, that leader has an apartment building and he owns a fancy apartment in New York. Isn't that angry? Don't you want to take revenge? Don't you want to tear them down? And the imperialists have hijacked this. The spirit of struggle and conflict, the Oedipal desire, let all your anger out, let your sexual desires out. They weaponize it. And that's largely the story of the Cold War. During the Cold War, the CIA figured out how to beat communists at their own game. And they figured out, look, we can use the communist ideology against the communists. And the overthrow of the Eastern Bloc, the color revolutions, was largely taking the aesthetic of rage, rebellion, revenge, resentment, and weaponizing it against the communist governments. And it worked. And communist governments fell. The Soviet Union fell. Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, they all fell because the imperialists hacked into the Oedipal libidinal impulses, the dialectical spirit of struggle. Whereas the communist governments that are still around, they don't encourage people to kill their parents. They actually support the traditional family. And they don't tell people there is no nation. They emphasize loyalty to the country. And if you look at China, socialism with Chinese characteristics is about, we're going to have the economy work in the interests of everyone. It's about, kind of loyalty to the country, pride in your heritage. It's a completely different thing. And there's a reason Trotsky broke with Stalin. Stalin changed what communism meant and what he did with the 5-year plans, invoking a spirit of community and all of that to build the Soviet Union up. That was a break with the communist aesthetic. There is the psychology of communism that Trotsky fully embraced with his theory of permanent revolution. Well, the communist governments that exist, that have broken out of imperialism, have largely broken with dialectical materialism and with the Oedipal and libidinal leftist appeal. In addition to that, economically speaking, the Soviet Union had amazing achievements. They took a country that was impoverished and they turned it into an industrial superpower. They built the world's largest power plants, the world's largest steel mills. They electrified the country. They wiped out illiteracy. They built a modern university system. They had the best ballets in the world, the best plays, the best movies in the world, Shostakovich composing his music and Sergei Eisenstein making his films. They did amazing things. And when anybody tells you communism failed, they're full of shit because, it turned the Soviet Union into a superpower and it turned China into the second largest economy in the world. But once a country gets over that first hurdle, once they pave the roads, they build the power plants, they build a modern educational system, there's more to life than that. People want to have fun. People want material goods. And communism, the model that Stalin developed of everything being run by the government isn't so good at that. The government is not very good at making children's toys. The government's not very good at making clothing. The government is not very good at running hotels and restaurants. And what the communist countries have learned is that you want to maintain a planned economy. The major industries need to be under the hands of the state. You need to have a state bank that controls the flow of credit. You need to have 5-year economic plans for the whole country. You need to have a rationally organized economy where profits are not in command. And then you let the things that make life fun, be governed by the market. Let people vote with their dollars on what kind of clothes they want to wear, or what kind of toys are made, or what restaurant is better, right? That have the overall economy be working in the interests of society, but at the same time, allow the market to do its work with fun stuff, right? Society is not going to fall apart if kids don't have toys. Might not be fun for kids, but, it would be fine. Society's not going to fall apart. The stuff that makes life fun but is not essential, let the market work and make sure that the economy is rationally controlled and organized. And that's, in China, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics, where they have a vast market sector and people start businesses and become wealthy. But the overall economy is planned and controlled by the state. And they have 5-year economic plans and they control the economy. And as a result, China has become super wealthy. And another thing that constantly people come at you with is, China, they're only wealthy because they became capitalist. What does capitalism mean? In China, almost all the industries are state-run. It's about 50% state ownership in the overall economy. All the major industries are state-controlled. Steel, electricity, mining. I mean, all the industries are state-run. Plus, they have a 5-year economic plan that the Communist Party comes out with every 5 years, and every company, private or public, has to follow it. If the government shows up and says, you got to do this, you got to do it. You have no private property rights, right? So even the private companies have to follow the 5-year plan. On top of that, they have a ruling Marxist-Leninist party. So, profits are not in command. It's an economy centralized and controlled by the state. But there's a lot of private enterprise within it that allows people to get wealthy and have new ideas and innovations and make things like clothing and children's toys and high-tech startups and all of that. So what do you call that, right? And if you say, well, that's capitalism, it's not capitalism in the sense that America is. In America, profits are in command. In America, the corporations control the government and make sure the government doesn't get in their way and maximize their profits. So profits are not in command. And if you say, well, China became capitalist, and this is what is infuriating about these people, say, well, China they're only wealthy because they became capitalist. It's like in China, the government controls the major industries, it controls the banks. They have a 5-year plan. They've got a ruling Marxist-Leninist party, but they're capitalist. Meanwhile, Obamacare is communism. We got to stop Obamacare. Give me a break, right? Mamdani is a communist because he's talked about giving people free buses. So he's a total communist. But China, where the government runs all the industries, where the government runs the banks, where they have a 5-year plan, that's capitalism. These people are idiots. They are lying sacks of shit. They don't think about what these words mean. They don't care about truth, about what's right and wrong. They don't care about what Marx wrote. All they care about is the other team is bad. And this is dangerous political tribalism. This is the years of lead, folks, right? None of these fucking libertarians or Republicans that are on there screaming, well, communists are retarded and they want to take our money. None of them give a shit about anything Marx wrote. They've never heard of the problem of overproduction or the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They don't give a shit about that. They don't give a shit about any of it. They just care that those woke people are wrong and they're bad. And the Mamdani fans out there and the young, blue-haired, dressing up as a hippopotamus, leftist, they don't care either. They don't care. All they care about is Republicans are racist. My mom and dad are racist. Trump is Hitler. They don't care either. This is dangerous political tribalism. This is the years of lead, right? And that right now we don't need people that are going around feeding into Republicans versus Democrats. I'm telling you, folks, the Democrats have done bad things. Republicans have done bad things. I am horrified by what ICE is doing. Going into people's homes without warrants and terrorizing people. I'm not for it. Trump is an awful president. He should be impeached and imprisoned for his war crimes against the Iranian people. I'm not shilling for Trump, but Joe Biden sent the FBI to terrorize the Uhuru movement. Joe Biden started an evil war in Ukraine that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, a war that never should have happened. We don't need team sports right now. And team sports is making people stupid. It's making people stupid in America right now, right? I made a meme the other day I've made a couple memes. Let me see if I can find. I've made a couple cartoons that I think people need to see. I don't remember what I called them. Maybe I need to save them again. I made a couple cartoons that people really need to see. Let me show you my cartoons here. And thank you to everyone who is following us. Here's the first cartoon, right? Call it teacher's cartoon. All right, here's the first cartoon, right? And this is where political discourse is in America, right? This is political discourse. This is my teacher's cartoon, right? Stalin was a crazy LGBT activist who wanted to raise taxes and give people free stuff. Hitler was a big, mean Christian gun owner who wanted stricter immigration laws. Learning history from social media is making us all stupider. Trump is not Hitler. Obama and Mamdani are not Stalin. Folks, if you don't realize it, homosexuality was illegal under Stalin. So was abortion. Hitler was a vegetarian, and Hitler took away people's guns, and Hitler was all kinds of crazy things. This caricature where Republicans are Nazis, according to people who don't like Republicans, Democrats are communists, according to people who don't like Democrats. Neither of these people are helping anyone learn what fascism actually is or what communism actually is. It's dumb. The Democrats of today are not communists, and the Republicans of today are not fascists, are not Nazis, right? And here's, I guess I'll put on my other cartoon that I made, right? This is another cartoon that again, shows us how toxic the team sports is right now. So this one we'll call the candidates cartoon, right? Right? This is my candidates cartoon. The Democrat says Republicans are traitors secretly working for Russia. And the Republican says Democrats are traitors secretly working for China. And one of the guys in the audience says, wait, aren't Russia and China close allies? And then the woman sitting here says, aren't both parties funded by Israel? Like, neither side gets it, and neither side understands what's going on here, right? The most important thing we learned in the 20th century is you cannot create equality in poverty, right? And Marx knew this. If you go back and read what Marx wrote, he very clearly said you cannot create a society where people are equal until there is vast material abundance, right? And he wrote this in his critique of the Goethe program. I will quote you. This is what Marx himself said, right? Caleb Marx wanted to make everyone equal. No, Marx wanted to create vast abundance in society so inequality would fade away. This is what Marx actually said on the topic of making everyone equal. This is what he said. This is from the critique of the Goethe program. In the higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor is vanished. After labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want. After the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual and the springs of wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. You cannot have an egalitarian society in poverty. It's only when technology advances to the point people don't have to work and labor becomes life's prime want. Only when the productive forces have increased and people are free to just kind of do what they want to do with the all-around development of the individual. Only when the division between mental and physical labor has completely vanished. Only then do you have an egalitarian society. And what went wrong in the 20th century is, in many communist countries, they tried to make people equal in poverty. You can't do that. You cannot make people equal in poverty. It doesn't work that way. They learned that in China. People say, well, China's not communist because they're billionaires. No, No, they're on the road to communism because they have billionaires. Because communism is about liberating the means of production from the irrationality of poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance. It's about getting rid of this problem where technological advancement leads to economic chaos and unleashing a huge amount of wealth in society so that we can move toward a world with so much wealth and abundance that the need for the state fades away. But a lot of communist countries were barricaded and isolated. And in their barricading and isolating, they said, okay, well, we're super poor, but we're going to try to make everyone equal in poverty. And it did not work. And Pol Pot's Cambodia was a great example of what happens when you try to make everyone equal in poverty. And the Cultural Revolution in China is a great example of what happens when you try to make everyone equal in poverty. And the first few years of Cuba, Che Guevara was not a very good economist. He was a great, heroic fighter, anti-imperialist, but a bad economist. And Che Guevara tried to build socialism in Cuba on the basis of no material incentives. It doesn't work. You cannot create equality in poverty. The only way you get equality is with abundance. And that's why you can't be a communist in America, because everyone in America thinks communism is making everyone equal. You can't make everyone equal until you have vast abundance in society. Until you have created vast abundance, you can't make anyone equal. And so we need an ideology that says we need a state that actively works to create vast material abundance. And if you say you're a communist, that doesn't communicate that. It means you want to make everything in common, you want to make everyone equal. But if you say you're an innovationist, that means that you advocate a government that wants to unleash human innovation and human growth. It communicates what we're for. We're for human creativity. We're for technology. We're for innovation, right? It gets to the essence of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make everyone equal, right? And we're not trying to make everybody equal. The Soviet Union, everyone was not equal. China today, everyone is not equal. North Korea, everyone is not equal. No communist government in the world has made everyone equal. And when they tried, it was a disaster, and they learned from it. They learned you can have an organized economy, a rationally organized economy, where profits are not in command, and raise your country up and move toward abundance. And that's very much related to what fascism actually is. Because ultimately, the struggle is to unleash human creativity and abundance. And the ruling class has realized the only way to save their system is with degrowth. The essence of fascism in Nazi Germany was degrowth. The Nazis degrew in order to stabilize the German economy. They created a slave labor underclass. They started military spending, and in doing so, they pushed women out of the workforce, and they engaged in policies called reverse inflation, and they got rid of unemployment, and they rebooted the German economy for 3 or 4 years during the Great Depression with degrowth. The essence of fascism is degrowth. The prison industrial complex in America is fascism. We had all these unemployed folks, largely African Americans, in the urban centers, and there was a problem, and it was a problem, so they started locking them up. And corporations got a big subsidy because they were locking people in jail, and they weren't out looking for jobs, so the unemployment rate went down, and capitalism in America was stabilized in the 1980s and 90s, largely by degrowth, by creating a prison underclass. Society got poorer. When you have a huge number of people in society in prison, that makes society poorer. So we made America poorer by destroying loads of families, destroying loads of working people's lives, creating a slave labor underclass in the prisons, and it stabilized our economy a little bit in the 80s and 90s. The military-industrial complex is fascism, right? Society does not get wealthier when you have a war. War leads to death and destruction and killing. And American capitalism cannot maintain itself without wars. It's addicted to war. The government has to pour billions and billions and billions of dollars into private corporations so they can build tanks and drones and weapons, and they have to tear down countries around the world as a way of stabilizing their system. Yes, American capitalism is based on Nazi economics. It is based on the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex. It is based on stabilizing capitalism with degrowth, driving down the productive forces. That's what fascism is. Fascism is keeping the rich and powerful in control of the economy, keeping profits in command, but destroying the productive forces in order to stabilize capitalism. And this system cannot continue to exist without degrowth. It needs degrowth in order to keep going. And the more the economy gets going and the more that you have technological advancement like AI, the more desperate for degrowth they're going to be. And that's why the World Economic Forum is up there talking about you're going to own nothing, you're going to live in a pod and eat bugs. That's why they're talking about World War III against Russia or World War III against China. That's why they're barricading, barricading the barricade and fighting with Iran. That's why they're talking about, about invading different countries, attacking Cuba. It's based on the fact that their system cannot keep going without destruction. Their system needs destruction in order to keep moving. However, humanity as a group wants growth. People want to have a better life. People want to see their living standards go up. It is the basic desire to want more than you already have, to see progress in your life, to be advancing. That is one of the most basic human needs. The human drive to innovate doesn't line up with what capitalism needs. Capitalism, imperialism, the globalist rule of the big bankers needs to drive down productive forces and impoverish people. And humanity is producing and innovating and inventing and using AI and being creative in ways they never have before. That is the conflict that is defining our era. Russia wants Russia to be more productive. They want their population to go up. They're encouraging people to have children. They want men to move there and get married. They want to make their country more prosperous. They're opening up new farms. Russia wants economic growth. China wants economic growth. And every year the government comes out with a 5-year economic plan to have economic growth. India wants economic growth. They're capitalists, right? It's largely a capitalist economy, but they're part of the rising new economy. They're aligned and doing business with Russia and China, and they want growth. Iran wants growth. The Ayatollahs, right? They have economic plans and they organize the economy. They call it not capitalism, but Islam. They want economic growth. And when Evo Morales was running Bolivia, when Bolivia was a socialist country, they had the highest rate of economic growth in South America. Vietnam with their socialism-oriented market economy, they want economic growth. Humanity wants economic growth. I want economic growth. You want economic growth. The people in your neighborhood, the people in your town want economic growth. And the billionaire monopolies that run this country and run the globalist imperialist system can't have economic growth. They can't. Because if the world keeps growing, their system can't handle it. And ultimately, their system is going to be overthrown. And we have governments that have broken out of their system that are overseeing economic growth. And those governments are at odds with them. And the world is slipping out of their fingers. And their irrational economic system with profits in command can't handle technological advancement. They urgently need to stop economic growth. And the very nature of mankind, human beings are growth-oriented. That is the conflict of our time. That's what the struggle is about. And so calling ourselves innovationists makes it clear that we are in favor of economic growth and we want a government that invests and unleashes economic growth. The other thing, Marxism is largely designed to be a labor-oriented movement. It's about labor unions, right? And Marx, that was his whole thesis. We're going to build labor unions. Even Marxism-Leninism. The Soviet economic movement, even though it emphasized national liberation, was still about building labor unions. We're moving toward a gig economy. And in a gig economy, you don't have the same type of labor consciousness. Every worker in the gig economy thinks like an entrepreneur. It's just true. An Uber driver is competing with other Uber drivers to get the best rides, to get the most rides. And he doesn't see other Uber drivers. And he largely has to be creative and have kind of a go-get-em spirit and be clever enough to get the rides. The other workers are his competitors, and he's seeing himself as a micro-entrepreneur. And the people on Fiverr, right? If you work for Fiverr, right? Those gigs on the website. Again, is that a matter of being a worker? No. And that big corporations are still exploiting workers, no doubt about it. And those Uber drivers are exploited by Uber, but they don't have the same kind of consciousness. It's not like you have a factory where you have one boss and you're all renting yourself out to that boss. The gig economy is creating a different kind of consciousness, a consciousness that emphasizes, you need to be smart, you need to be creative, et cetera, in order to get by in the gig economy. But it alienates workers from each other. And so the idea that you're going to have this classic workers versus capitalists, wage workers organizing against their employers, that's not how you're going to build a movement. In fact, we need a populist movement, not a class struggle, but a movement of all of society demanding a pro-growth government, a government that invests in people and breaks the power of the big monopolies in order to do it. And Marxism-Leninism is based on class struggle, the worker versus the employer, even though Lenin said, that's not really what it's about. It's about nations, it's about imperialism. Well, we're taking that to another stage. We're saying we don't want to build a class struggle movement. We want to build a movement demanding a government that unleashes human beings' creative abilities and organizes the economy to invest in human creative power as the source of all wealth. So we have entered a new stage, and that's my book, Innovationism, a book of quotations that summarizes this worldview, innovationism. And this is where anti-imperialism is at. I go to Russia all the time. I was in Russia this spring. I'm going to be back there in September. I go to Russia all the time. I have been to Iran a number of times. I made a whole movie about going to Iran. I understand this. The struggle against globalism, imperialism is not red flags and hammers and sickles anymore. It's not. And the American people are not. And largely the red flag, hammer and sickle thing has turned into a Republicans versus Democrats thing. It's your team is bad. No, your team is bad. And it's not going to lead us anywhere good. We have to break out of this. And in order to break out of this, we have to not be communists. We have to be innovationists. We have to put out a philosophy that celebrates God and celebrates human creativity and isn't emphasizing conflict and division, but is emphasizing community and bringing people together. We have to have a philosophy that emphasizes we are pro-economic growth and that we want to stop the degrowth they need to save their system. We have a new synthesis called innovationism, and we are the only ones that understand the tendency of the falling rate of profit. We are the only ones that understand the problem of overproduction. We're the only ones that understand imperialism, what Lenin talked about, but we have taken it in a new direction. And that the libidinal and Oedipal spirit of leftism is being used not for good right now, right? So that's what we're at. That's the kind of movement that we're building. But then, so let's bring it back to Donald Trump. What's going on with Donald Trump? All right, this is Donald Trump today. This is Donald Trump pounding the podium against the commies, right? He pounded the podium against the commies today. Right? What's going on here? Why do we have Donald Trump doing what he's doing? Why is he failing? What's going on?
You can be loyal to Karl Marx, or you can be loyal to America. You can be a communist, or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. As for those who peddle Marxist lies about our heritage, who tell our children that we live on stolen land, or that our heroes were oppressors, they're doing something much worse than slandering our past. They are slandering and attacking our future. Not going to let that happen.
What's going on here? Right? This is, as I said at the beginning of the stream, first time is tragedy, second time is farce. Right? This is a quote from Karl Marx. Right? Marx wrote this book called 18th Brumaire. It was about how France was in the middle of a crisis, and in the middle of the crisis, right? French society in 1851 was in the middle of a crisis. A generation before, they'd had the French Revolution. There was chaos afterwards. And Napoleon, the ever victorious general, seized power and stabilized French society. And he created the French Empire, and he started attacking other countries, and he kind of stabilized French society and created a military state to march the ideals of the French Revolution around the world. So fast forward a generation later in 1851, French society was in a crisis. There were strikes. There was an economic crisis. So they found Napoleon's nephew, Louis Bonaparte, and they had him take over the government and try to stabilize French society. And Marx said, first time is tragedy, second time as farce. And that's what's happening with Trump, right? With Trump, it's first time is tragedy, second time is farce. A generation ago, 50 years ago, America was in a crisis. We'd had the 60s, the Vietnam War. America had lost the Vietnam War. Black people were rebelling and fighting for their rights, and America was in a huge amount of confusion. And amid that confusion, the Eastern establishment, the kind of New England establishment, was trying to impose degrowth economic policies, right? And that it was, that was the Ford Foundation and it was the Rockefeller think tanks, some of the wealthiest people. They had kind of hijacked the counterculture aesthetics of, hallucinogens, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They had MK Ultra, and they were trying to use the crisis to seize power and impose degrowth on America. And America had its first new left president, Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter was wrecking the U.S. economy, basically, and trying to impose degrowth to save American capitalism. The U.S. economy had a downturn. And so, the price of gas was very, very high. And the price of heating in the winter was very high. And Jimmy Carter got on TV and he said, I think that you should put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat. That is what you should do to save energy. That is what I would like my fellow Americans to do. Turn up the heat. Don't turn up the heat now. Put on a sweater. That's called degrowth. Another thing is Americans were losing their jobs. There were layoffs in the factories and all of that. And Jimmy Carter said, owning things and having things is not going to make you happy. And we need to remember that you're not going to have satisfaction in life by owning things. What was he selling? He's telling American workers, you got to be poorer. And he openly wrote manifestos, the Global 2000 report. We got to drive down the population. And in the name of LGBT rights, he met with gay activists at the White House. In the name of women's rights and feminism, he had the National Women's Conference in Houston, Texas. In the name of feminism and women's rights and anti-racism, Jimmy Carter was making America a poorer country. And we're going to make the American people much more poor. And then the Islamic Revolution of Iran happened, and Iran toppled a U.S.-backed dictator, and Jimmy Carter was supposed to invade Iran and overthrow Iran. And they had the hostage crisis where the Iranians, they seized the American embassy. Jimmy Carter was supposed to invade Iran, and he was supposed to mobilize the American people. They have taken our embassy, these Ayatollahs, and we are supposed to go there and invade their country. But he couldn't do it. The American people didn't want a war. And he was supposed to send soldiers to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. In Afghanistan, the people there are being invaded by the Soviet Union. And so I am bringing back draft registration. But the American people didn't do it. And when he brought back draft registration, there were huge protests and people remembered the Vietnam War and they didn't want to do it. And, as much as they had fuck Iran rallies, they had big anti-Iran rallies, Iran is evil and all that, the American people didn't want to have a war. And Jimmy Carter couldn't do it. So as Jimmy Carter was wrecking the U.S. economy in the name of degrowth, he really couldn't convince the American people to go out and have another war. And have a huge war to save U.S. imperialism. And he couldn't convince them to send soldiers to Afghanistan. He couldn't invade Iran and send U.S. military forces into Iran. The American people weren't going to do it. And Iran had their revolution and humiliated the United States. And so Ronald Reagan came along, and Ronald Reagan's whole thing was, we're tired of apologizing. You just heard Trump on there. We're tired of apologizing for America. We're the greatest country in the world, and we need more military spending. And Ronald Reagan kind of rallied the military-industrial complex, the lower levels of capital, right? The generals that took out ads in the New York Times, and it was the military manufacturers and all of them. And they overthrew Jimmy Carter. And it was the Reagan Revolution. It was a big sweep. And the big line that Ronald Reagan, used to defeat Jimmy Carter, I think I can even put it on here. He said, are you any better off than you were a few years ago? And it was true. Jimmy Carter's economic policies were intended to make Americans poorer. And, they were poorer. Are you any better off? Right? This was the line on which Ronald Reagan won the election in 1980. And he won. It was a huge landslide. It was the Reagan Revolution that basically what Jimmy Carter was doing, he was failing to mobilize the U.S. public for a new war. He couldn't do it. And he was wrecking the economy. And he was doing it on behalf of the Rockefellers. Zbigniew Brzezinski was his national security advisor, and the Global 2000 report and the Rockefeller think tanks and the Trilateral Commission had designed his presidency. And in the name of this kind of new liberal, new left, socialistic thing, he was trying to stabilize the United States, and it was not working. And Americans were questioning things, and the new communist movement that was inspired by China was rising, and there was a lot of confusion. So amid all of that confusion, Ronald Reagan was kind of picked to be the strong man on a white horse to make America great again. And that's what Ronald Reagan was supposed to do. He was supposed to make America great again, make people proud to be American again, and they're not going to be ashamed of our country, and we're gonna get military spending going again to make the economy going strong. And Ronald Reagan, he became the president. I can't get the video to download, but anyway, Ronald Reagan became the president, and U.S. society stabilized. It largely stabilized in the 1980s. The economy got worse. There was, jobs were being shipped overseas, and union protections were rolled back. I mean, it's kind of amazing. You think about what used to exist. For example, until Ronald Reagan came along, teachers got unemployment all summer. I can't even believe this, but until Ronald Reagan existed, if you were a teacher, you got your paycheck for being a teacher, and then all summer long, the kids were on summer break. And so teachers all got unemployment insurance. And that was just a subsidy paid into the economy. The teachers for 3 months every summer got half their paycheck from the government. Well, Ronald Reagan came along and he said, no, not going to do that. And he made it illegal for anyone who works for an educational institution to get unemployment. That took a lot of money out of the economy because teachers were no longer getting a paycheck over the summer. In addition to that, the air traffic controllers went on strike. PATCO, right? The air traffic controllers went on strike. It's one of the highest paying jobs is an air traffic controller because it requires you to be very, very skilled. And if you make a mistake, people are going to die. And the air traffic controllers went on strike, and Ronald Reagan broke their union. Ordered them back to work and broke their union and invoked the Taft-Hartley law. And so Ronald Reagan took some dramatic moves that were basically designed to impose austerity and degrowth. And he started the war on drugs and the prison industrial complex. And by 1982, 1983, the U.S. economy was stable. And then the Soviet Union started falling, and China was opening up to foreign investment. And by the mid-'80s, they said, we're all friends after 6 o'clock. Ronald Reagan was able to stabilize the U.S. economy in the name of kind of this right-wing populism. Like we're going to fight Jimmy Carter like he's soft on the commies, like he's a communist, right? That's the idea. We're going to fight Jimmy Carter like he's a communist, like he's soft on the commies. We're going to fight Jimmy Carter. And at the same time, we're going to use some degrowth measures. We're going to restart military spending. We're going to, weaken the power of labor unions. And at the same time, we got foreign investment coming in. We're expanding. The communist governments are falling in Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Union and China is bringing in foreign investment. And based on that, Ronald Reagan was able to stabilize the U.S. economy, and the fight in the ruling class ended. When Ronald Reagan was coming into office, the ruling class were at each other's throats. And this is finally, this is Ronald Reagan. This is the line on which he won the White House, right? Here we go. If I can just get it to come up on the screen. Wait, this is the line on which Ronald Reagan won the White House. This is how he won. This was the line on which he won.
Next Tuesday is election day. Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. You'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have. This country doesn't have to be in the shape that it is in. We do not have to go on sharing in scarcity with the country getting worse off, with unemployment growing. We talk about the unemployment lines. If all of the unemployed today were in a single line, allowing 2 feet for each one of them, that line would reach from New York City to Los Angeles, California. All of this can be cured, and all of it can be solved. I have not had the experience that the president has had in holding that office, but I think in being governor of California, the most populous state in the Union, if it were a nation, it would be the 7th ranking economic power in the world. I too had some lonely moments and decisions to make. I know that the economic program that I have proposed for this nation in the next few years can resolve many.
Yeah, and Ronald Reagan used some degrowth measures and stabilized U.S. society, right? And you see it. His message there was, are you any better off than you were 4 years ago? No. And Americans are not proud of their country. They just lost the Vietnam War, etc. So Reagan's saying, I'll make America great again. And he did it. I mean, it worked largely because of global things like China opening up, like the Eastern Bloc getting weaker, but some degrowth like the prison industrial complex and weakening the labor unions and, making it harder to get unemployment and things like that. America's economy had stabilized, and the fight in the ruling class was over. And this was, by 1984, this is how Ronald Reagan was reelected.
Whatever else history may say about my candidacy, I hope it will be recorded that I appeal to our best hopes, not our worst fears, to our confidence rather than our doubts, to the facts.
500 young men and women will be married any time in the past, nearly 2,000 families, with interest rates at about half. Today, more men and women. It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence.
Yeah, the morning in America, Ronald Reagan stabilized capitalism. So Trump is supposed to be Ronald Reagan 2.0, and he's supposed to come in and stabilize capitalism. He increased military spending. He's having a war with Iran. And he's talking against the Democrats. They're all a bunch of communists. We're going to be proud of our country again, right? What did he say? What's he saying today about communism, right?
Who crossed the Delaware, who settled the West, and conquered the skies. You know who those people are. But we will never let that happen. Our American ancestors did not shed their blood at Concord and Trenton, Gettysburg and Shiloh, Midway and Normandy, just so that a band of thieves, radicals, and lunatics could come in and loot, pillage our nation.
Yeah, and so basically, Trump is supposed to come in and stabilize capitalism, and we're in a big crisis, and it's not working. Capitalism is not stabilizing. So Trump is falling back on what is the founding principle of the American deep state, right? And when you talk about this deep state, you're talking about the intelligence agencies. The CIA was founded to fight communism during the Cold War. That's why they were created they created it after the Second World War. The CIA, they built Langley, and the CIA was to fight communism. The FBI was created to fight communism, right? After the Russian Revolution, J. Edgar Hoover was there, and they needed to fight communism after the Russian Revolution. And J. Edgar Hoover was a congressional librarian who'd given all kinds of speeches about the evils of communism. So Donald Trump is a failure. He's a failed Reagan. He didn't do what Reagan was supposed to do, right? He didn't make it morning in America again. He didn't make Americans proud of their country again. He didn't, make things better. We're not all friends after 6 o'clock. We're not back to the late Cold War normal in America. And so Trump has failed. So he's falling back on communism bad, because that's the foundation upon which he's basically begging the deep state not to get rid of it. What we need to remember, and this is a tough pill for some people to swallow, there's an element here, right? Now, there's a couple layers to the DSA sweep that we need to talk about. The most obvious one is that people are more open to an economic leftist message, to social democracy, the idea that we should have free healthcare, the idea that we should have free education. People are more open to that message, right? Because the economy is bad. People say, why? Corporations get free stuff all the time. Why shouldn't I get free stuff? So the social democratic message, it's working out. There's part of that. The other thing is that people are very demoralized with America, and people are seeing that the American system is falling apart. People are seeing that countries around the world, like Iran, are justified in their fight against American imperialism. So they're more open to hearing about communist ideas. And so there's that, but there's another factor. And I this may be hard for some people to admit, but this is kind of like the rise of the alt-right during Trump's first term. During Trump's first term, Trump was seen as kind of a threat, a potential Bonapartist. And so to make the case that, that things were out of control and that Trump was dangerous and all of that, U.S. media gave a huge amount of attention to the alt-right, to Richard Spencer, to, white supremacists, gave them a huge amount of attention to send a message to the American deep state. Things are out of control. We're going to be having race riots. These guys are anti-Semitic. They're anti-Israel. They're trying to build some kind of white separatist movement. That's why you need to get rid of Trump. To some degree or other, the ruling class is doing that with the left right now, right? They're saying Trump is an awful president. He's mismanaged the economy. And look, now Darliza Chevier is the candidate that has won the Democratic nomination in New York State. And she voted, she praised Kim Il-sung on her Twitter, and she likes Lenin and Stalin, and they're using them as like scare clowns, right? And fine. I mean, good for them. I mean, it's not right or wrong. It's just a fact, right? But yes, there are more interest in radical ideas, but also the ruling class is using this to terrify their rivals in the ruling class and say, get Trump out of office. This is how badly he's mismanaged things. Right. And that's, if you listen to the Democrats that are denouncing their own party, it's a game. Right. And they're trying to say, look, Trump is such a bad leader that we're voting for actual communists here in America. And that's why we got to get rid of him. That's what's going on. OK. And if you don't think that's what's going on, you're deluding yourself. There's an element of that going on. And that's not pleasant for people to admit, but that's part of what's going on. At the end of the day, what do we have to do? We have to build the innovationist movement. That's what we have to do. We're not Democrats. We're not Republicans. We're pro-growth. We're anti-imperialists. And we have to use the opening that is taking place right now to build our movement. We have to build the anti-monopoly coalition, and we need to build the Center for Political Innovation. And at the end of the day, Mamdani is not going to be able to solve the crisis, right? His program of, tax corporations, set up some free bookstores or some free, grocery stores, free buses. It's not going to solve the crisis. The only thing that's going to solve the crisis is if we have a government of action that fights for working families, a pro-growth government that invests in people. That's the only thing that's going to solve the crisis. And that's not an easy thing. And the only way we're going to do it is we have to build the network. We have to build the community of people that understand this ideology and get it everywhere. And right now, DSA is being friendly to us. Great. There's overlap. I went on a podcast with Cornel West. I never in a million years dreamed that would happen. But I was on a podcast, Revolutionary Change, Peter Hager, Jen Perlman. They had me on their podcast. And I was on there with Dr. Cornel West, the big DSA founder. He was the first hour. Second hour was yours truly, Caleb Maupin. They're being really nice to us. They had our LA people on Really American podcast. They featured our members in New York City when we blocked the No Kings parade. They featured us on Status Coup. They're being really nice to us right now. During Biden's administration, DSA was trying to purge all the anti-war voices. Now it's the opposite because Trump is president and he's launched this war on Iran and he's wrecked the economy. Now DSA is trying to capture and get anti-war people on their side. Okay, well, we'll take it. If they'll give us a platform and they'll have us there, great. But what's really important is that we don't try to out DSA. We are selling a different product. We are not putting forward a message of the government should tax people and give people free stuff. We're saying we need a government of action that fights for working families. We need a government that invests in working people and breaks the power of the big monopolies. We need to use this moment to emphasize how we are different from DSA, not how we're the same. And that's why the Communist Party is going to fade into nothing. And the Party for Socialism and Liberation is falling apart right now because they're trying to out DSA. We're not. We are not the same as DSA. DSA promotes degrowth. We're in favor of growth. DSA has a lot of people that are all kinds of different things. We are innovationists. We need to emphasize our unique anti-monopoly, pro-growth, pro-working families message. That's really, really important right now. It's really, really important that we do that. And we need to build this movement. That's why you should come to our training school in Chicago next month. And that's why you should send us a contribution so that we can get this done. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. We need to popularize innovationism all across America. We need to engage in education and all of that. And yeah, when these people are out there at DSA, if they're marching for Palestine, we'll be there with them. And we've got our book explaining that the Houthis are innovationists. They're a pro-growth, a movement fighting for Yemen to break out of globalism, imperialism, and pro-growth. And we'll have this book and we'll distribute it, right? And we'll have our book on Kim Il-sungia and the flour that you can't get in America that's named after Kim Il-sung. And we'll do the education. We'll build the network that can push forward our vision. And if DSA is having pro-Palestine rallies or anti-war rallies or no kings rallies, we'll go to those rallies and we'll say we're against Trump's awful war, we're against his awful policies, and we're innovationists and we have a unique message. And Tucker Carlson is about to launch a new political party. He quit the Republican Party. When that party opens up, we are going to go to every meeting. We are going to go to every gathering of that new political party. And we are going to say, we need a new anti-war political party. And innovationism is the answer. We're the Center for Political Innovationism. We love a new political party that's outside the Democrats, outside the Republicans, wants peace with Russia, opposes Israel, and you need to be an innovationist. We're going to go there. Wherever Americans are actively breaking with the system, we need to go with them and tell them what the answer is, which is innovationism, and recruit them into our network, into our brotherhood, and teach them how to do what our members in LA are doing today out in the streets of Los Angeles. Teach them how to do what Penny has been doing out in the streets of Minneapolis. Teach them what we in New York City were doing, and get people postering and doing outreach, have workshops going on across the country to teach people about innovationism. This is the only way out of the crisis, folks. We're the only ones who understand what this crisis is about, why imperialism can't handle AI, why Russia and China are rising, why it's not about redistribution of wealth. It's not about making everyone equal. It's about having a pro-growth economy. Only CPI gets it. Only CPI gets it. And we're the only ones who get this. And we've got to build this movement. It is urgent, urgent, urgent that we build this movement. And we understand the rising new economy, and we train people, and our members are learning to write and learning to speak and doing great things. We need to do it. Now, I just want to end with this final point, okay? So the White House, they're falling back on communism bad as their message. That's their way out of this, right? Is communism bad? And they tweeted this out today. You cannot be a communist. You can be a communist or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. Well, I mean, we're done fighting with what communism means. We're innovationists. We're in a new stage. And part of that is that, nobody agrees with that more than communists. Nobody agrees with that more than communists. What was I canceled for back when I was still calling myself a communist? What was I canceled for? For saying that I believe in American patriotism, saying that if we want to build an anti-imperialist movement in America, we need to make the case that imperialism as a system is bad for America. You're not allowed to say that, all right? Young communists, people become communists in America because they're mad. They're mad and they want to label and they want to let everyone know just how much they hate America. Nobody in America agrees with this more than the communists. And for 2, 3 years, 7 years straight, I was canceled because I believed in socialism with American characteristics and patriotic socialism. You're a Nazi. It's like nails on a chalkboard. The people that are rallying around hammers and sickles and red flags and communism, nothing makes them angrier than American patriotism. They became communists because they want to tell their mom and dad who are patriots, fuck you, mom and dad, I hate your country. They want to let everyone know just how much they hate America. That's why they're becoming communists. And that's why they're a dead political movement. You're not going to build a movement. Why are we innovationists? On the basis of libidinal and Oedipal leftist appeal. And that's all they've got. That's all communism is. They don't even support communist governments at this point, most of them. They're Trotskyists, they're anarchists. They don't even support communist governments. They just are libidinal. They're just angry. They're just anti-patriotic. They're just mad. That's all they've got. That's all they've got. And it's infuriating to me because if you're building a serious political movement, you have to be part of this country. If you're building a serious movement, if you want to run America, you need to have a message aimed at making America better and improving the lives of people in America. And if you're against patriotism, you are, as a result, declaring that's not what you want to do, right? The communists in Brazil don't say fuck Brazil. The communists in Burkina Faso don't say fuck Burkina Faso. But in America, because our government, our deep state, was founded on anti-communism, being a communist is a way of saying, I don't like this country. I hate everyone here. I'm alienatable. That's not going to help. It's not going to help. And if you really have no business running for office in America or being involved in American politics, if you're not trying to make America a better country, and if you're not making a case to Americans that your policies will improve their lives, but that's not why people become communists. People don't become communists because they want to improve people's lives. They want to be, they become communists in America because they want everyone to know how angry they are. And it's not helpful. And again, years of lead, fomenting people to be destructive and angry, and American years of lead to celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk, to want to kill people on the streets, fomenting crazy political violence to get everyone confused. That's years of lead. That's helpful to the ruling class in playing the game that they're playing right now. And I will say, you know, in Iran today, they are burying the supreme leader. His memorial is happening. And they're burying the supreme leader on the streets of Iran. And I was in the same room as the supreme leader in 2015. And I will never forget when everyone in the room started chanting death to America. And it broke my heart that that's what America, my country, means to people in Iran. It means imperialism. It means wars. It means Israel. It means impoverishment. And right now in the streets of Iran, millions of people are gathering, hundreds of thousands at least, are gathering to mourn for the leader of their country that was ruthlessly murdered by America. And what are they chanting? Now, obviously, they don't mean death to my family. They don't mean death to the people in our community. But that's what America means to the people of the world. And I think we have a responsibility not to let it be that way. We have a responsibility to represent John Brown and Harriet Tubman and Eugene Debs and the other side of America. And I don't think we should surrender all of America's history and all of America to the ruling class. Just because you're mad, just to let everyone know how ultra revolutionary you are. You want to hand over the entire history of our country to the forces of evil? You want our people, our land, our nation to be known to the world as murderers and imperialists? Why can't we be the representatives of the forces of resistance in America, of the abolitionist movement, of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Why can't we do that? Why do we hand over the entire history of our country to Trump? Because it makes us feel good, Caleb, because you're not as revolutionary as we are. You know, and I got to say this. Look, I risked my life on a ship trying to bring medical aid to Yemen. I work for RT. I do reporting for an anti-imperialist TV network. But I have a million teenagers, 15-year-olds, who insist I'm not a real anti-imperialist because they have a different position than me on a piece of cloth. Anti-imperialism is not about flags, folks. It's not about flags. It's about if you're with the people of the world against the big monopolies and the wars they use to enforce their system, or you're not. And if you are actually against imperialism, the system that creates all these ugly wars, the system that the people on the streets of Iran are chanting against right now, if you're actually against that system, you won't just try to get your anger out on the streets of New York City or on the internet. You'll try to build a real movement against imperialism. And you'll try to organize in America to have a movement that could actually break America out of imperialism, actually bring imperialism down. And that means working in the interests of the American people and building a movement that helps the American people understand that when Trump bombs Iran and kills the supreme leader, that's not good for us. That the interests of the American people and the interests of the billionaire bankers are not the same. That's what it means to be a real anti-imperialist, right? To be a real anti-imperialist is to take this seriously. That's what it means to be a real anti-imperialist. It's not about what your position is on a piece of cloth. And these very same people that support Ukraine and are on the same side in Ukraine as our government, and are on the same side that demonize China, they then say to me, oh, you're not a real anti-imperialist because you wave a flag. I wave a flag because I'm serious, because I know the only future America is going to have is going to be joining with the people of the world, and that to really love the American people means to hate this system and hate imperialism. That's what it means to truly love America, and that we are the true patriots. We are the true patriots. That's what it means. And that if we are going to be serious about opposing imperialism, we need to act as if we will be the government. We need to build a movement that could actually win and mobilize for America. And that means that we don't just have the idea, to feel good, to feel good about ourselves because, oh, I'm against America, right? Do you think Donald Trump tweeted this out because he wants to make everyone like communists? He wants everyone to know just how cool and hip the communists are and how edgy they are. No, he's sending a message that communists, people that are communist, are against America. That's what he's doing, right? And I'm not a communist. I'm an innovationist. I'm an anti-imperialist. And the kind of anti-imperialist movement I want to build is one that says America can have a future, joining arm in arm with the people of the world in a new economy, in a multipolar world based on win-win cooperation. We just had an amazing rally in New York City for July 4th. And I'm still editing the video, but I'm going to show you some of our video. We had a sign, right? We made a big sign that had the "We won't fight another rich man's war" on it, the image from 50 years ago. And we got a big placard, and our members turned out. It was a great rally in Times Square in New York City. So I'm going to show you a couple clips from the rally. The whole video of the rally will be out soon. I'm just editing it together. And then I'll start answering people's questions. But anyway, here we go.
Fourth, everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy of 1776, because there's a lot of liberal jibber-jabber out there. There's a lot of media out there, the 1619 Project and others, that would try and convince you that somehow the American Revolution was a reactionary thing, that it was a bad thing, that somehow the benevolent British Empire was some awful thing for us colonists to break love from. What was the reality of the British Empire system? What did the British Empire system mean to the people of China in the century of humiliation? What did it mean to the people of India who had their people starved and lost millions of people in intentional famines? What did it mean to the people of Palestine who had a fake country called Israel implanted there in order to steal the oil from under the ground? It meant poverty and death and destruction, and the same is true for here in the United States. It was the British Empire system that was keeping the American people poor, and the revolution to overthrow the British Empire system was indeed an amazing thing. And it was in 1865 when we had our second American Revolution. And there are so many people out there that would try and convince you that somehow the British Empire was a friend to black people in this country. It is the further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was the British Empire who threatened to park their navy and break up the Union blockade of the South. It was the British Empire, it was the Wall Street bankers who were funding the slavocracy of the South. And it was Russia who brought their navy into New York Harbor and parked their navy to make the statement that the oppression of black people in this country would not go on, that what King George and his ilk were trying to do to the American people was disgusting, was a disgusting affront to humanity. And that is really the legacy of the American Revolution, the legacy of standing with the people of the world that we have gotten so far away from. There seems to be some sort of recruiting drive for the U.S. military going on behind us. And we love our veterans for their intentions. There are so many veterans who I do think genuinely do believe that they are doing the right thing, but unfortunately what they're really doing is spilling their blood and spilling the blood of poor people all around the world to fill the pockets of the Wall Street bankers. It's truly disgusting. Can you imagine how amazing it would be if we could bring those soldiers home, if we could bring them home and they could rebuild this country? We could hire millions of people. Those could be teachers that could be hired. $7 million a day goes to Israel.
Yeah, that was Noah, our member on the bullhorn. That's the message. Innovationism is the future. All right. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Then after that, I'll be answering questions. So if you got a question for the second half of the show, go to buymeacoffee.com. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Send me a question. I see we got a few questions that have already come in. Buy me a coffee. Names and locations. Names and locations. Ryan in Kansas City. Jenny in Cincinnati. Rock Island, Illinois. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Alex in Brazil. Good to see you. Gavin is in Illinois. Jenny is in Cincinnati. Didn't want to forget names. Bradley's in Los Angeles. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? South Africa, Master Jack. Brian in Dayton. Paul in Brentwood. Paul was great at the rally. Wait till you see the video. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Marty in Ellisburg, Washington. Welcome, Marty. Good to see you. All roads lead to Rome from the Far East. God bless. Irene in Brooklyn, still an antinatalist. Don't think that ever changing. Jane in New Zealand. Diana in Florida. Well, Jane, I don't think I'm going to ever have children either, but I do believe in growth and I do believe in humanity. Angelica in Western New York. Hope you're liking the show, Angelica. JT24 in Mississippi. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Audrey in London. It's got to be late over there or early in the morning, perhaps. Names and locations. Jacob in Wisconsin. Good to see you, Jacob. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else with us? Audrey, my real name. Okay. Children are the best. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right. Well, listen, if you got a question, go to buymeacoffee.com. Send your question. Oh, Dan in the LA area is here. 3 daughters are watching. Very good. Yeah. If you got a question, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your question. Oh, Jeff in Australia. Good to see you. Yeah. We are having our national training school in Chicago. Our national 7-day program is coming up, and we're getting the money together and we're doing it. Oh, Michael in Bayonne. Good to see you, Michael. It's going to be great. So if you'd like to come to it, here's the link. You can register. And we really need donations, honestly. If you can send us a donation, go to cpiusa.org/donate. Just donate, right? Donate to support CPI, right? But you really ought to just come if you can come, right? You can get the time off work to spend a week with us in Chicago and become part of the program. We'd like to get you involved. We want to recruit you. Look, I have said it over and over and over again, and I will say it again. We are not interested in social media entertainment. If this is just a TV show, you will eventually change the channel. And I know a lot of people like this now, that the internet, internet activism is just kind of a TV show. And for a while, they're a communist, and then they're a traditionalist Catholic, and then they're a Buddhist, and then they're an anarchist, and then they're, I don't know what, a basket weaver or whatever. If it's just a TV show, you don't watch the same TV show for 50 years. You don't. You change the channel. And if all I ever am to you is a TV show that you watch, you're going to move on and you're going to watch another show. I don't want this to be a TV show. This is a community, right? Get involved. I want you to make friends in CPI. I want you to get involved in our efforts to promote innovationism and put up posters and billboards around the country. I want you to learn to teach and lead workshops and education. I want you to write books about innovationism, right? We're all about empowering our members. Sometimes these kind of social media influencers types, they make their own group, they start their own party or whatever, but it's not really that. It's just a way to glorify themselves. That's not CPI. We empower our members and we let other people step up and we share the spotlight and we help other people find their strengths. I hope that you will join CPI, come to our national 7-day training program. We're going to have a France out of Africa rally. More information about that is coming up, but we need you to get involved. Only innovationism is going to save this country, right? The left that's funded by the big foundations promoting degrowth is not going to save our country. The right that believes in free markets and wants to make America great again and thinks communism is the greatest enemy, and they're not going to get. We're the only way out of this. Only innovationism understands that we need a government of action that fights for working families. We need to break the power of the big monopolies and rebuild this country. So if you got any questions, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. You can also do super chats because we're monetized. You can also do Rumble rants if you're on the Rumble. But all right, so we got 2 questions that have come in via Buy Me a Coffee. Hempcar said, have you ever heard of this organization, Hands Off Cuba? They send money to Cuba and stuff. I have heard of them. I think they've had events in LA that our members have gone to. And I think they do. It's great, and they've got info on Cuba. Any kind of coalition to stop the U.S. imperialist attacks on Cuba is a good thing. We are in favor of ending the blockade of Cuba, trading with Cuba as we would trade with any other country on the basis of win-win cooperation. That's what we would be in favor of. And Hands Off Cuba sounds like a great movement. I can't show these videos on here, right? Especially I can't show them at 2 times speed. I can't do that, right? Hempcar, you often ask me to do things I just can't do. I've never seen these videos before, and you want me to play them at 2 times speed on this channel. I can't do that, right? I just can't do that. I'm sorry. I know you sent a super chat, and I do agree with the Hands Off Cuba thing. It sounds like a great thing, anything. And I think our members know people from the group. But there you go. And then someone sent a very long anonymous super chat. Here we go. 1, you talked about mind control in Hollywood films. I was wondering if you saw this new movie called Obsession. I haven't seen it. I don't know. Essentially, it's about some guy who uses mystic artifact to make this alternative dressing girl fall for him. Turns her into a completely different person who is lobotomized. Okay, I haven't seen it. This afternoon, my wife and I, we went to go see Supergirl. And it was a disappointment. It was awful. I was hoping I would see a Superman movie that just happened to be about Supergirl. Instead, we saw a movie about a girl in outer space trying to rescue her dog from human traffickers and going from different planets where there's various different rats and bugs and mucus, and it was awful. It was horrible. I mean, I like the Superman movies because Superman, especially you watch those 80s Superman movies, they make you feel optimistic. And Superman is an icon, is a leftist icon, right? Man of Steel. How do you say Man of Steel in Russian? That's Stalin, right? And Superman fought the Ku Klux Klan, and Superman is like the best of the modern era of Roosevelt. But Supergirl was awful. My wife and I sat there in the movie and we were just like, what the hell is this? It was awful. It was a disappointment. It was nice to spend time with my wife in the afternoon, but Supergirl, not a good movie. Thumbs down. Title should be Super Person. Oh boy. Well, they did have to put in there, why is he a Superman and you're a Supergirl? Shouldn't you be a Superwoman? They did slip that into the script somehow. So there you go. But yeah, it wasn't a good movie. It was not a good movie. Didn't leave me feeling good. But no, I haven't seen Obsession. 2, why would the U.S. supported fascists in Turkey, Gladio Project, were interesting. These guys supposedly hated the Kurds, but the CIA was conducting John Stockwell, Saddam al-Bakr. The Kurds were used in Syria. Talk about the Kurds. What are you asking me? I mean, the Kurdish independence, the Kurdish nationalist movement in Turkey at some points was a Marxist-Leninist movement. At some points it was aligned with China, with Albania. Now they talk in the name of anarchism. Turkey is, part of NATO. And Turkey, I don't think is an imperialist country, but it's, got kind of a bourgeois nationalist government, Erdogan, that comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're the primary funders of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're anti-imperialist sometimes, but in some cases, like in Libya, they're blatantly pro-imperialist. In Syria, they're blatantly pro-imperialist. They're kind of like India. They do what they think is in their interest. And the USA tried to remove them. They did try to remove them in a coup, they have tried to remove them before. But yeah, they're kind of an Islamist government that it's not technically Islamist, right? The Turkish constitution forbids an Islamic government, but Erdogan is as close to an Islamist as you can get under Turkish law. And they're independent in a lot of ways, but at the same time, they're not really anti-imperialist. They go back and forth, and that's Turkey. And yeah, like these kind of forces that were used to fight communists, the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkish nationalists and others were used to fight communists. And yet the USA doesn't completely trust them. And illiberal organizations, that's what they did during the Cold War, is that they realized communism was rising. And so to beat communism, they built a million different illiberal, fanatical movements that would fight communism, but were also illiberal and fanatical. And the deep state didn't trust them. The imperialists didn't trust them, but they let them grow. And then as the Cold War was winding down, Manuel Noriega was one of these guys, and they removed him. They invaded Panama in 1989. And George Soros funded color revolutions against Marcos and against the government of South Korea. And that this is the game that they play. They back kind of illiberal forces to fight communism, but then they don't really trust them and will go against them. That's just how geopolitics is played. That was the late Cold War strategy. During the early Cold War, it was the communists against the capitalists. And even though the USA was able to rain death and destruction on Vietnam and on Korea and on Indonesia, the communists were still gaining ground because it was David versus Goliath. And the communists were David, and nobody supports Goliath. And the communists, were against the imperialists. And in the late Cold War, the rise of Brzezinski and the rise of Henry Kissinger was manipulating that, making it so it's not David versus Goliath. You had the communists, but you also had Baathism, and you also had Islamism, and you also had, different movements, and the Chinese communists were fighting the Soviet communists, and they made it confusing. That's how the U.S. imperialists won the Cold War, is they made it confusing. And so a lot of these formations, you're mentioning some formation in Turkey, again, a lot of these groups, they fomented them as like a way to cause this kind of confusion. This is the art of counterinsurgency. There we go. 3, why is it so many anti-Soviet groups like Solidarity and the Hungarian 1956 people, even as of today, are so anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish? Didn't the Soviets hate Israel, Soviet Jewry, Stalin's anti-Nazi campaigns, refuseniks? Well, here's the thing. Right? What happened right before, the Cold War began? You had the Second World War. And who was the Soviet Union and America fighting in the Second World War? Nazis. And what did the Soviet Union do in the areas that they took over? Like Hungary. I mean, they didn't take it over. In the areas they liberated from the Nazis and brought in Warsaw Pact governments, they largely executed the Nazis. And Cardinal Mindszenty was this pro-Nazi Catholic clergyman. Who, was arrested and persecuted in Hungary. And that a lot of these kind of right-wing, these Nazi sympathizers were the main force of opposition to the communists in the Eastern Bloc. And the USA reconciled with a lot of Nazis. And that's what Operation Paperclip was about. And the CIA recruited the Galen organization. And that, these were Nazis. And all over the world, Nazi sympathizers went into the American camp. That happened all over the world. There were a few exceptions. There was a guy named Francis Parker Yockey, who was a Nazi who started trying to build like a pro-Soviet Nazi movement, but he was a small fringe element, right? For the most part, most of the Nazi sympathizers just became U.S. backers. And a lot of them made an excuse about, actually the Nazis weren't really nationalists or whatever. We don't like the Nazis. We're this other kind of nationalism. A lot of them adjusted their ideology so they weren't Nazis anymore, and were on the American side. And that happened all over the world. So you're asking, why are they so anti-Jewish? Because they're Nazis. That's kind of the basis of Nazi ideology, is anti-Semitism. And it's, instead of opposing capitalism, it's kind of trying to restore feudalism, go back to feudalism. And part of feudalism in Europe was the pogroms, was the Jew, was the moneylender, right? In feudalism, you need somebody to handle the money. In capitalism, everybody handles money. But in feudalism, most people never touch money. Only people that are engaged in trade of some kind, merchants or whatever, touch money. And Jews were kind of designated as the people who handled money in feudalism. And they lived separate from everybody else, walled off in areas called ghettos, and they had privileges other people didn't have. They could get education, they could question Christian theology in ways others couldn't. But when the economy got bad, everybody blamed them and went and burned the ghetto and killed them, and they would be persecuted, right? When people would get mad, they'd be kind of the scapegoat. So it was a weird relationship Jews had in medieval Europe. A big part of feudalism in Europe was anti-Semitism was that, that Jews are the money people and we blame them for society's economic woes and we keep them separate from everybody. Nazism is largely an attempt to bring back feudalism in Germany, right? To go back to feudalism. They were the Third Reich. It was like an empire. Hitler was like the king. They had swords and knights and they did Wagner and all of that. And they're trying to go back to feudalism. And so when Germany had a big economic downturn in 1939, they had a pogrom and they Kristallnacht and they went out and smashed the stores of Jewish store owners. And, it's Nazism is largely like this attempt to oppose modern capitalism in Germany by going back to feudalism, but not changing the economy very much, just kind of, bringing back the aesthetic or the spirit of feudalism. And it's conservative in the sense that it's not modernist, right? And that's why it was considered a party of the right, even though they criticized capitalism. That's one thing American right-wingers do not understand. All over the world, there are conservatives who don't like capitalism because they think it goes against the things conservatives believe in. However, American conservatives are so uneducated, they think to be a conservative means you love capitalism. No, actually, and Marx spends a lot of the Communist Manifesto talking about all the things that are important to conservatives are being destroyed by capitalism, right? You read the first couple paragraphs, first couple pages of the Communist Manifesto. It's all about how the family is being destroyed by capitalism, loyalty, religion is being destroyed by capitalism. All the things conservatives are trying to conserve are destroyed because in capitalism, no remaining nexus exists between man and man, but naked self-interest, callous cash payment. And, in a lot of ways, communist governments are conservative in that they are defending the traditional family, defending traditional values, defending, love of the homeland, love of the nation, community. And that's something that American leftists also don't understand. They embrace the libidinal Oedipal impulses. They denounce communist governments and they just embrace that kind of dialectical spirit. And they don't understand that communist governments, in order to stay intact, had to break with the leftist mindset. You cannot build a healthy movement on the basis of leftist, libidinal, and Oedipal impulses. You can't do it, right? And so it's a contradiction. Conservatives and the right don't get it, and the left doesn't get it either. 4, the Ethiopian famine of the 80s. Do you have any opinions about the Derg or what they did in Ethiopia? I think Mengistu and eventually 87 gave several ethnic regions autonomy. Eritrea. So I was in the Workers' World Party, and the Workers' World Party supported the Derg. Right? They were close to the Derg in Ethiopia. Deirdre Griswold, who was, a leader of them, who was an awful person in a lot of ways. She was my friend before I moved to New York. And then, she, don't get me started, but Deirdre, who I, was a real disappointment. Let me put it that way. Her father was Vince Copeland, one of the founders of the Workers' World Party. And she went and lived in Ethiopia for a year. I mean, she knew Mengistu. She attended meetings of the Derg. So I was in the Workers' World Party, and they were Derg aligned. They have 2 books on the Derg by Deirdre, Eyewitness Ethiopia and something else. And, so I heard the pro-Derg perspective, right? That's the perspective that I heard. And the line that we had and the Workers' World Party was the Derg was a pro-Soviet government. So first you had Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was the emperor of Ethiopia. He fought the fascists during World War II because he was aligned with the British. During World War II, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, he lived in Britain in exile. After World War II, he went back to Ethiopia, and he was the king of Ethiopia. He was kind of a nationalist. Rastafarians in Jamaica started worshiping him and saying he was the second coming of Jesus, that's Rastafarianism, which is a religion. He was the leader. He was overthrown by the military of Ethiopia, and he established the Derg, which was the military government of Ethiopia starting from 1978 up until the mid-90s. The Derg was a pro-Soviet, pro-Cuba, pro-North Korean government. Now, Eritrea was a region of Ethiopia. It was part of Ethiopia at the time, but it was Islamic, and Ethiopia is Christian, right? It was the Christian kingdom, right? Eritrea, they said, we're not Ethiopians, we're Eritreans, we're a different nationality. And they had formed a resistance movement on the basis of we're not the same people, we have a different religion, we're an oppressed nation. So after the Derg took power, they had a meeting with the Eritreans, and they signed an agreement, which was they would have regional autonomy, they could have Islamic practices, etc. And the Maoist communists didn't agree to it, and the Soviet communists of Eritrea accepted the Derg. So the Maoist communists of Eritrea called Ethiopia, puppets of Soviet imperialism, and they continued fighting for the independence of Eritrea. The CIA supported them against the Derg because the Derg was the pro-Soviet government. So they won. Eritrea became an independent country. The ruling party of Eritrea is the Maoist Communist Party that fought the Derg and was backed first by both the Soviet Union and China, and then later only China. And they're the anti-Derg force that was backed by the CIA. What's interesting, though, is, are they still communists? I don't know. But they have largely created somewhat of a planned economy, and they call them the North Korea of Africa. And they're anti-imperialists. The Eritreans are anti-imperialists, and it's a very, very poor country on the African continent. And even though they got backing from China and the CIA to fight the Derg, they're in power, and the U.S. imperialists don't like them, and they're friendly to North Korea, and they're pro-Russia, and they're pro-China. And I don't know if they still call themselves communists, honestly. I don't know if the ruling party of Eritrea is still Marxist-Leninist. They may not be, but they're anti-imperialist, and that's what matters, right? And it really doesn't matter what people call themselves. But the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, they're the ruling party of Eritrea. Formerly, they were the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, which was a Marxist-Leninist group. And they're the ruling party, and they are anti-imperialists. Meanwhile, Ethiopia, they had the Derg, which was pro-Soviet backed, but there was a coup in the 90s, and it was actually the Enver Hoxha Albania Communist Party that took over, which is weird. And then they just became pro-US imperialist, right? And the ruling party of Ethiopia is now largely a pro-imperialist party that started out as an Enver Hoxha party that just seized power and went into the hands of the Western people. However, the ruling party of Eritrea, the land redistribution that went on under the Derg is still intact, right? They didn't give, so they did land redistribution under the Derg. That was a positive thing. People own their own land, right? The peasantry own their own land. And there wasn't very much economic development in the 80s. There was that big famine because they were in the middle of a war, because they were fighting U.S. imperialism, and because there were sanctions on them, and they were barricaded. And so, the Derg, the time when the Derg was in power in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, was not a good time in their history. And it's a very, very poor country. And there was a civil war, and they were barricaded, and they had a big famine. And, I don't know. I come out, the tradition that I was in, the Workers' World Party, was very, very pro-Derg. Was that the right position? It based on my political background, the Derg were anti-imperialist. So that made sense, right? The Workers' World Party that I was in, that basically in America, you had the Soviet-aligned Communist Party USA that ran in elections that was, Khrushchevist, revisionist. They supported the Democrats, and they kind of hid their identity, and they ran candidates for office. You had various Trotskyist groups that kind of supported Cuba and kind of supported the Vietnamese, but really denounced the Soviet Union and were sowing confusion. They were the new left. You had Maoist groups that were aligned with China, but then China's politics started getting more confusing. In the 70s, China started aligning with the United States. They didn't know what to do. They all kind of fell apart in the 70s. Workers' World Party was another communist party that was kind of modeled on the CPUSA. Sam Marcy was a Trotskyist, but he'd been in the CPUSA, and his vision was to build something like what the Communist Party would be if it was more revolutionary. And that, while the Communist Party was basically taking instructions from the Soviet Union, vote for the Democrats, decrease the arms race, the Workers' World Party was not close to the Soviet Union. They were close to North Korea. They were close to Gaddafi. They were close to Cuba. And their thing was big anti-war rallies. They didn't run for office. They didn't back the Democrats. If they ran for office, it was just a recruiting drive. And their thing was have big protests. And so the Derg was a government. It was like a third world Marxist-Leninist government that was aligned with the Soviets, but more radical. You had the Tricontinental Congress that was formed by Che Guevara in the late 60s. And it was all these kind of armed third world anti-imperialist groups that were funded by the Soviet Union sometimes, but they felt the Soviet Union was a little too conservative, kind of stodgy. They were aligned with the Soviet Union, but they were more radical. Libya, under Gaddafi, Cuba, Fidel Castro, North Korea, the Derg was part of that. Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Iraq was kind of part of that at some points. That's what Workers' World was aligned with. They were aligned with the tricontinental, and this kind of third world Marxist-Leninist movement. They really liked the Sandinistas of Nicaragua. They supported the Islamic Revolution of Iran, but they were very critical of Khomeini. They saw Iran as kind of anti-imperialist. That's the role that they played. They kind of represented that current. The problem with them is that those politics are out of date. Right. And at the time I was finding my way out of the Workers' World Party. I had a conversation with Deirdre Griswold, and I said, what's Venezuela? Is Venezuela socialist or not? And she basically told me, well, they're doing their best, but it's just like Salvador Allende's Chile. It's just they're trying to reform capitalism. I said, no, they're not. Right. Venezuela is a different thing. And what about China? Well, their position was basically China was not capitalist, but they lost their way. They need to go back to the Soviet model. Any country that didn't have a Soviet-style one-party state wasn't really socialist in their view. It was bourgeois nationalist or social democratic or something. And they were convinced the Soviet model was going to come back. It's not going to come back. And they had this their politics was out of date. They couldn't explain the BRICS. They didn't understand what was going on in China. And as I was leaving, they took positions on China that they should be embarrassed of. Fred Goldstein wrote a series of articles about China, that basically China was having a counter-revolution, and that they supported Bo Xilai, the leader of Chongqing, the corrupt leader who was arrested and imprisoned. And they basically took the position that, China was like half socialist and half capitalist. Shanghai was the capitalist wing, and Chongqing, where Bo Xilai was the socialist wing. And that, Bo Xilai, and the fall of Bo Xilai and the arrest of Bo Xilai showed that China was going to have a counter-revolution. And they were wrong. And right after Bo Xilai fell, Xi Jinping came in. And China now is very, very proud of their communism and very anti-imperialist and all of this. They were completely wrong about China. They completely dropped the ball. And, they just don't understand. They couldn't understand the world. And that's why they couldn't understand Trump. And it's funny because their practice when Trump was first coming into office, on the one hand, they just immediately just started having anti-Trump rallies. Trump's a racist, just liberal Trump derangement syndrome rallies. On the one hand. On the other hand, if you read their press, they were calling Trump racist and stuff. But at the same time, they wrote an op-ed right before the 2016 election. Why the ruling class dumped Trump. And it was all about, the ruling class will never let Trump win because he's too anti-imperialist on Russia and stuff like that. And North Korea told them, we think Trump is the better candidate. And so Deirdre and Fred that were editing their newspaper were writing weird things like, yeah, Trump is bad, but he's too anti-war for the ruling class. And the ruling class has turned against him. Meanwhile, Larry Holmes and Sarah Flounders were organizing liberal Stop Trump rallies and just trying to outdo the liberals in their anti-Trump thing. It didn't even line up. They didn't know what they were doing. And then Trump won, which they said the ruling class had dumped Trump. I mean, how could that have happened? So Trump won. So Trump won. So then after Trump won, right, they ran an article right before they started organizing protests against Trump's inauguration. And I was out of the party at that point, and they were already talking shit about me on the internet, calling me a white supremacist and calling me this awful stuff. But Trevor Loudon made this hilarious documentary claiming that I was the secret leader of their Stop Trump rallies, and I was doing it, on behalf of Russia or Press TV or something like that, which was hilarious. It was very, very funny. And I was out of the group, you know what I mean? And their actual organization was becoming more and more Trump derangement syndrome. And Taryn Fivek, who is now in the Communist Party USA, suddenly, as I was leaving, found her way into the Workers' World Party and had a hysterical anti-Caleb campaign. And she was in the group, and they were organizing the anti-Trump rallies. And Trevor Loudon made this documentary claiming that I was secretly behind it. Which is hilarious, and so then after Trump won, right, they wrote an op-ed and said only the most racist Americans could support Trump. And then Deirdre, who had written this op-ed about how, only, the ruling class, has dumped Trump. Well, then she wrote another article about how, there had been a study that the average Trump supporting household, it makes over $100,000 a year. So the idea that any working class person supports Trump, that's a lie. And so I remember one of my former friends who was still in the party, I said to them, it's interesting. The ruling class doesn't support Trump, according to Workers' World. Now Deirdre is saying the working class doesn't support Trump. And they're saying only who supports Trump? Space aliens? I mean, it was like they had no idea what was going on with Trump. Meanwhile, North Korea, they were like the only communist group that still supported North Korea, was saying Trump is better for them because he was going to go there and they knew, from the moment that Trump took office that he was more friendly to North Korea. And so they didn't even know what they were doing. And they basically just cowered to liberalism. And I was out of the group, and then they started a hate campaign against me. There were Mossad agents in the group. They were infiltrated by Mossad because all of a sudden they started talking about anti-Semitism. Oh my God, anti-Semitism. And they had a speaker at their convention about the evils of anti-Semitism. And they decided I was an anti-Semite, right? And because I'd spoken at this conference in Iran, and I was an anti-Semite. Caleb's an anti-Semite. He hates Jews. That was their big thing. Caleb's an anti-Semite. They launched a campaign against me for being an anti-Semite, and that was weird. And so they've already started a hate campaign against me. And then all of a sudden, in North Carolina, their members tore down a Confederate statue and got a lot of news media attention for doing so. And so they went all in. And these North Carolina people, I could not stand them. You want to talk about people that are not revolutionary, that don't understand Marxism. They're just a bunch of liberal activists and rich kids and obnoxious. And, so in Durham, North Carolina, a bunch of their 20-year-old members who joined it because they thought it was a pro-trans group and were actually getting funding from Big Tobacco, right? You can't make this up, right? They were getting funding from Big Tobacco. They had a branch of the Workers' World Party that was running pro-trans rallies and I hate Republicans, Trump rallies. And they tore down a Confederate statue. So then in 2017, they had their national convention, and it was very big. It was the biggest national convention they'd ever had. It was like, usually the convention would be about 300 people. It was like 400 or 500 people packed into this auditorium. And the chant was, "Do it like Durham, do it like Durham." And they've never had a national convention ever since. Why? Because all those woke kids they brought in, there was sex drama. Somebody had sex with somebody and somebody accused somebody. And, and they've never had a national convention ever since then. And Baltimore, which was one of their biggest branches, they're out. LA, they're out, right? And Detroit, which is one of their oldest branches, they're out. They're out. And they collapsed as an organization. And why? Because they did it like Durham, right? Instead of actually following, anti-imperialism and actually emphasizing Marxism, they tried to sound like liberals. They did it like Durham. And their last convention, the poster that they made for their last convention looked like something from the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was falling, what was the image that we all saw at the time that the Soviet Union was falling? What was the image? It was tearing down statues, right? That libidinal, Oedipal, tear down statues. We don't need great leaders. Kill your father, kill the king, kill your parents. Well, this was the poster for their last convention that they ever had right before they went down, right? Do it like Durham. They're tearing down a statue, tearing down a statue. Do it like Durham, right? And they embraced Khrushchevism. They embraced the libidinal and Oedipal leftist impulse. They turned their backs on anti-imperialism, and they went all in with, we're going to try to out DSA. We're going to sound just like the liberals and have Trump derangement rallies. They did it like Durham. They pandered to the woke kids, and the woke kids came in. And what do woke kids always do? There's sex drama. and I don't know the details, and I'm not not even going to try to tell you. I know it was in Baltimore. Somebody did something to somebody, and I don't care, and I'm not interested. They had sex drama, and the whole group collapsed. Well, there you go. They didn't want me, right? As my career was increasing, I was speaking at conferences in Iran and making films in Iran and documentaries, and I was going to Russia and giving speeches while I was rising in popularity. Oh no, we don't want Caleb. We don't want Caleb. Oh no, we want these blue-haired, idiots from North Carolina. Do it like Durham. Do it like Durham, guys. Hope you're proud of yourselves, right? They don't even have their office. They closed down their office in New York. It's a tiny group. You got a couple people here in New York, got a couple people in Philadelphia. They got like one woman in Georgia. I got a couple people in San Francisco. That's it. They're done. Well, okay. You didn't want me, right? Keep in mind, I had given that group everything. I lived in a basement, and I was dedicated. I was determined to build that group, but they didn't want me, right? They just wanted to, it was just certain people's ego trip. It was something. Sarah Flounders wanted to be the boss, and Larry Helms wanted to be the boss. They wanted they wanted to be the superstars, and it had to be about them. And they didn't really understand communism very much. They were dumb as a box of rocks, and it had to be about them. They couldn't share the spotlight with anybody. So, they went under, and it is what it is. And it's probably not even worth discussing, but you asked me about the Derg, and, I was in a group that supported the Derg, and, they're a rare species, right? They're kind of like an endangered species. I would say they still exist, right? They've got an office you can probably find, you Google it. They're an endangered species at this point. Workers' World Party is, it's kind of like, like a rare species, right? If you go to Maine, there's a very good chance that if you go to the right places, you might see a moose. Well, if you go to an anti-Trump rally in New York City, there's a very good chance you might see an old gray-haired boomer handing out Workers' World. That's all that's left of them. And hey, that's their decision. If they had listened to me, if they had embraced anti-imperialism, they could have done something. But I am confident there are more members of CPI than there are members of Workers' World Party. They did it like Durham. Do it like Durham. All right. There you go. You did it like Durham. I hope you got what you wanted. Do it like Durham. Do it like Durham. But anyway, so I wanted to show you all the documentary that was made as I was leaving the party. These are the clips of Trevor Loudon saying I'm the secret leader of their group, and I'm leading all the Stop Trump rallies. It's really funny. And it's sad because this is the kind of thing that made them, so hostile to me. It's like the jealousy, right? It's about Caleb. It's not about us. Let me find it. It's America Under Siege. Yeah, here we go. Right.
Evidence anyone.
Right. Let's find the part about me. It's very, very funny. They've been watching me for years, but right. Where is it? Oh no, this is like the sequel. This isn't the one about me. This is like part 2. Oh wow. Yeah, this is part 2. All right, let me find the other one. This is not even the one that they did about me. America Under Siege. Oh yeah, here's the one that's about me. Sorry about that. That was the wrong one. That's Milo Yiannopoulos and Lauren Southern. That's not me. Right? Sorry. This is the first one. This is America Under Siege 2017, right before Trump's inauguration in January. They came out with this film about how I was the secret mastermind behind the Stop Trump protests. Here we go. Just waiting for it to download. But yeah, this takes me back. But look, we're doing something new and exciting. That's the point. We're doing something new and exciting with CPI. And I look at what we're doing. It's really, really amazing. We have built a real community of people that is doing really, really amazing work. Why don't I put on a clip about CPI while we wait? We'll do that. And then, well, okay. I think we may have the one, we'll show this, but then let's get back to talking about CPI. These groups don't matter. None of these little communist groups really, really matter. So there you go. So yeah, but yeah, if anyone else has got any more questions, please go to buymeacoffee.com and send them. Oh, that would be great. That would be great. Okay. Okay. Here's the film about me that Trevor Loudon made. Okay. Just waiting for it to show up on my desktop. What a night. What a night. If anyone's got any more questions, please send them. It's almost midnight here. Almost midnight. Yeah, just waiting for it to show up on my desktop. Don't you love it when it takes forever for things to show up on your desktop? It's very, very annoying. That's how I find it, at least. As soon as it shows up on my desktop, I can upload it into the program and we can have a good time. But until then, we're stuck here waiting. Aren't we? Well, if anyone has any more questions, that'd be great. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the video file to show up on my desktop, and then we can put it on, and then we can move on to talking about something else. But yeah, I'm very, very excited. Yeah, I think this was a good stream tonight. We talked about, here we go, important stuff. All right, here we go. All right. Yeah, just speeding forward. Here we go. Here's the part all about me.
Really strong message to the rest of the world.
Every protest movement, every revolution needs to get their message out to the world. Workers' World Party member Caleb Maupin is reaching millions of Americans daily through his positions with Iran's Press TV and Moscow's Russia Today. There's a young man in America called Caleb Maupin, a member of the Workers' World Party, an extreme radical.
U.S. society, born in racism, slavery, and the slaughter of the indigenous people, is now entering a deep political and economic crisis.
Who's been working as a correspondent for Press TV and now Russia Today, RT, going around these anti-Trump rallies, reporting on them, reporting on the division in American society.
Trump, he did win according to the U.S. Constitution, so you're saying you're protesting against the American democratic system, right?
So did Hitler. That doesn't mean we have to accept the way this as it is. We need to fight back against this fascist system.
Why do you think he'd be doing that?
Well, look at what he's doing and what he's working for. He's coming from a hardcore Marxist-Leninist fringe group that supports the North Korean regime, working as a paid agent for the Iranian government's propaganda machine, and then moving over as a paid agent to Vladimir Putin's propaganda machine. So when you're looking at this from a case of ideology, it doesn't make sense. How can a communist be working for Shiite Islamic fundamentalists and then for the gangster regime in Moscow? But if you think of it from what is the underlying agenda, which is the common purpose is to destroy America, it makes perfect sense.
This is the person that I know personally. Again, not that I'm a friend, but I encountered him on a number of occasions.
You know who this man is? He's a Republican. He's not actually Russian. He goes to these things and tries to video people and makes these edited videos to make it look like all communists are stupid. So that's what he does.
We're
so
just listening to his
you should know who he
ideas.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Listen,
you.
But
Yeah, thank
more.
you, thank you. Okay, thank you. So that should tell you volume about the ideology and the direction of Russia Today, which is very much anti-capitalist, anti-American, but actually there's a better word, subversive. That's what they're trying to do, subvert our system. That's their goal.
Yeah. That I got my whole section in the film. I'm the mastermind behind the Stop Trump protest movement, right? Caleb Maupin. But remember, I'm not a real anti-imperialist because I wave the American flag, right? There's whole documentaries about how I'm the mastermind behind the Stop Trump movement because I'm pro-North Korea and pro-China, but I'm not a real anti-imperialist. The real anti-imperialist is the 12-year-old kid on Twitter who calls me a big fat racist because you wave the American flag. But anyway, folks, the only thing that we can do is build CPI. That's really the only option we have. Is to build the Center for Political Innovation. We have something really, really special, which is a community of people that are dedicated to building an anti-imperialist movement. And that's the only way out of this. And if somebody else was going to do it, I'd work with them. And I've tried. Trust me. We have to just build CPI. That is our only option.
Jackson, we're good. All right.
So I decided to go to a Chicago workshop, and Caleb explained the economics of why our country is taking us to war. It's part of the economic system of globalism, imperialism.
The thing that struck me was that he was very passionate about what he was saying. He was very passionate.
Be myself and not be judged, for who I am.
I knew about the Trotskyist to neocon pipeline, but I didn't know why that was. I thought it's kind of a mystery. What I found by learning from Caleb is that the common thread is anti-populism. It's a distrust of the vast majority of working people.
The idea of defining capital as profits in command, and that's a brilliant definition to simplify it for people.
To try to actually build a community in the United States and also caring for one another.
I remember looking over the room and I saw all of the people in that room. It was a packed room. It was almost 150 people. And there was just this energy of acceptance, of goodwill towards other people. And they could just have a good time. And I remember thinking this is for me. I could do this. I'd like to do this for my life. I want to be an anti-imperialist.
I was just looking for a real organization, an authentic organization that really wanted to had a positive message and really wanted to build up America.
Have friends who are like-minded in the sense of trying to find the answers of becoming a real anti-imperialist.
So I found it very enlightening, and I was inspired to start my own chapter of CPI up in Minneapolis.
And yes, I was pushed to be a better activist. I was pushed to be more socially oriented. But I was never made to feel like I was a bad person for being the way that I was.
The LA group, what a great team of guys. It's just been such a rewarding experience.
And I've made some great friends along the way.
I remember feeling, for the first time in a long time, like I belonged somewhere. And I was never made to feel like I was a bad person for knowing things. People were interested in talking about the things that I was interested in talking about. And I could speak freely about my opinions, and people were fascinated.
He was talking about someone who drew a picture of him, and it was very funny. It was him in a suit and tie, which is what he was wearing, I think, that day that he was streaming. And he had, in this picture, there was him in his red hair that someone had drawn, and he was supposedly yelling, and I thought that was hysterical because they really captured the passion, and I think they were trying to be funny, but he showed that picture, and I hope he shows this picture because I think it's hysterical. It's not like sort of old man yells at cloud, but it kind of has an old man yells at cloud energy. But what he was really yelling at, as I got to know him as a person and look at his streams, was that he was yelling at what this country and what imperialism is doing to the rest of the world. And he was really trying to educate people to that effect. And having that level of passion is going to bring out different sides of you that some people may understand, some people may not get. But I certainly did get it because I have the same fiery, passion as well. So in that, we are all kindred spirits at CPI. But certainly, seeing Caleb that first time on YouTube, on his live stream, just going off.
Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, in one of his speeches, he said, if a person's political line is incorrect, his very soul is incorrect. Now, that's often misquoted or translated as, if a person has the incorrect political line, it is as if he has no soul. Well, I'm going to say that Mao had it backwards. I would say that it's not that if a person has the incorrect political line that he has no soul. I would say that if someone has no soul, then they have the incorrect political line. That's what I would say. And if we are not espousing optimism and hope, we have the wrong political line, no matter what we say. Yep, that's us. We are the Center for Political Innovation, and we are doing it. We are doing it. I got to edit the video from our July 4th rally. But yeah, I mean, we're getting it done. So yeah, I will give one last question. You know, I appreciate everyone in the chat. This video convinces me Caleb really does need a secret moon base. Well, there you go. If you can set one up for me, be in touch. But I'll give one last chance for anyone to send any questions. Buymeacoffee.com, super chats, Rumble rants, whatever you want to do. I'll give you one last chance to do that while I put on this other clip about anti-imperialism and CPI. And then, yeah, and then we'll be done. So send any questions you got. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb. I'll answer any questions. But yeah, here we go. Oh, goodness gracious. I keep forgetting that this file doesn't work. All right. Here we go.
Globalism, imperialism, as I understand it from CPI, is a financial system that is run by Wall Street and London, where giant international corporations spread their tentacles around the world, holding back development.
You look around this country, they are literally unpaving the roads in 27 different states. Municipalities cannot maintain paved roads. They don't have enough money. They're unpaving roads all across America. Our life expectancy has gone down by 2 years. Is Iran the one doing this to us? No. This is being done by big corporations, vultures, bankers that are looting the public budget to serve an international system.
How I define globalism/imperialism is degrowth, while the private banks and private corporation grows and scams the regular working person in America. And is modern time colonialism.
Globalists, elite, oligarchs, corporatists, the deep state. I mean, it's all that same class of people that are at the top, and they want to stay at the top.
They sink their fangs into Africa, they sink their fangs into Latin America, they sink their fangs into Asia, and they have U.S. military bases to accompany the corporations to extract huge profits from across the planet, while we, the American people, the American working class, American working families are left behind.
Not only are they doing something that's immoral by conquering other countries, but they're also doing it in a way that does not benefit the working people of the core empire. It only benefits this global ruling class that has hollowed out industries and has financialized everything.
You know, Nigeria is a country in Africa with so much oil, but the people of Nigeria are in deep and utter poverty because their oil is controlled by ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, and they are prevented from building up their own economy. And there are many examples of this, and that imperialism is going around the world in degrowing countries.
Our servicemen do not want to fight. On the aircraft carriers that they have parked outside of Iran, you have thousands of American servicemen intentionally clogging the toilets and trying to flood the aircraft carrier because they know that the Iranian people are not their enemies.
And the countries that have broken free from that system, like Burkina Faso, where they are creating food sovereignty and economic independence get demonized as juntas and authoritarian.
Iran is not the enemy, folks. Israel's the enemy. The Zionists are the enemy. Epstein elitists are the enemy.
Their system is more destructive than productive.
I really appreciate the Center for Political Innovation because we are a family. We understand that we have to encourage each other and that to stay on the revolutionary road, we also need to work on personal development.
I don't know if you've ever heard it. He used to talk about the old 1950s television show. It's The Lone Ranger. You know, the Lone Ranger, he wore a mask, he was a white dude, and then he had a Native American sidekick named Tonto. The story goes, the joke of Lenny Bruce is that the Lone Ranger and Tonto were surrounded by a group of Native Americans with their spears ready, pointed out at them, and they were facing the edge of a cliff. There was no escape. And so the Lone Ranger turned to Tonto and said, "Tonto, what are we going to do?" And Tonto said, "What do you mean we, white man?" Well, you think about that joke, I think that's what's ahead for the U.S. ruling class. Because they're looking at China rising up, and they're looking at Russia rising up, and they're looking at Venezuela and Iran, and they're turning to the American working class, and they're saying, "American working class." And I think Joe Biden's saying, "American working class, what are we going to do?" And the American working class is saying, "What do you mean we, Joe Biden? What do you mean we?"
An author of a brand new book called Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism. And when I first started flipping through this book, what struck me wasn't necessarily that I agreed with everything in it. In fact, there's plenty of things here that I think people are going to want to challenge. But what I found interesting is that Caleb is trying to answer some really big questions that a lot of us have been wrestling with lately. And what makes the book interesting is that it's not just a collection of Caleb's thoughts on world events. Much of it is drawn from his own experiences over the years, covering international politics, organizing anti-war movements, traveling abroad, questioning U.S. government officials, speaking in countries like Iran, interacting with world leaders, including Vladimir Putin, and even having one of his articles republished in North Korea's state newspaper. Through those experiences, Caleb explores some of the biggest geopolitical questions of our time, from China and Russia to Ukraine, NATO, energy markets, sanctions, and the shifting balance of power in an increasingly multipolar world. And whether you agree with his conclusions or not, he has a very different framework for understanding what's happening in the world right now than what we hear on CNN, Fox News, or most of the mainstream press.
Yep. All right, so we got a super chat. Is there any meaningful difference between communism and capitalism if they both use a debt-based monetary system? Well, I think there's a pretty big difference in that, if you talk about communism, you're talking about the higher stage of communism. That's a world without money, right? That's a world with so much wealth and abundance that there's no need for a state, right? That's what I think your trend refers to as a resource-based economy. That's communism. It's a post-scarcity world. Now, we have governments around the world that come out of anti-colonial revolutions, and they don't have debt-based monetary systems. They have government-owned banks and state banks that inject credit strategically for the good of the nation. The reason we have a debt-based monetary system is that the Federal Reserve is a private bank that was set up by our government, and every dollar they print, we go deeper in debt. They don't have that in anti-imperialist countries. They usually have a state bank that prints the money at the behest of the state. We don't go in debt to private companies when money is printed, and credit is strategically injected as part of an overall economic plan. So, yeah, I don't, I just, that's not, and China is moving to gold. Well, gold, that's just the backing of the currency. That's a separate issue. All right. That's, whether you have a fiat currency. And yeah, Russia is buying up gold and all that's true. But, this is something that gets repeated. This is something that is said by people that are, have watched certain documentaries, but that's just not the case. I mean, in countries that have anti-colonial revolutions, that set up state banks, they don't have a debt-based monetary system. That's what is said generally to dismiss it. But we're not here to defend, quote unquote, communism as a movement. We're here to defend innovationism and anti-imperialism, right? That if you're doing the communism thing, you're going to be stuck in the Cold War. You're going to be stuck in dialectical materialism. You're going to be confused. Innovationism is a new stage. We're building a new movement, and you should check us out. You should check us out. Well, I'm glad someone sent a question. That is appreciated, Chris. Thank you for your question. And other than that, I think we're going to wrap this up. So thank you, everybody. We went over 3 hours tonight, and I think it was a good one. So I'm going to put on the closing music, and we're out of here. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.